of the cost of the project? Is that how they determine their fee or whatever? And one of the things that Sarah and I talked about, and guys, I certainly don't want to dominate this, but I just have a lot of questions that have been over the years asked to me, and so I want to chime in and certainly encourage the members too. But that was one of the concerns, even under design bid build, is selecting an architect. And most anybody in this industry will tell you is 75% design selecting your general contractor. If that design professional comes in and is selected and then drafts the RFP for the hard bid of the project, then the perception is that the architect or the design professional can narrow that field substantially by the requirements or the qualifications he puts on a general contractor, not a construction manager, just a general contractor. So there's not a question in that. I was just kind of relaying.
Yeah, I would like to respond. I think there is a perception in the industry that occurs, but I can tell you that does not occur in our process. I mean, there's minimum qualifications that a contractor needs to submit for our projects, and we do not let the architect narrow the pool based on their specifications that they develop.
Okay.
We try to keep that as broad as we can, and in the 9 years that I've been there, we've never had one complaint about that issue for our process.
Representative Werkheiser has a. Is that? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Number 19.
Citing charts, seating charts. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Just to make it more complicated, for projects in the Board of Regents, our office actually manages the consultant architect selection process, and we do have participation from GFIC in that process. But so anything that we do, large projects, we actually do that first. And I think the most impact you'd have on a contractor would be the criteria that might be put in, whether a contractor has to have 5 years experience of similar construction. If it's a hospital project, how many hospitals have you built in the last 5 years, or research labs or things like that. But generally speaking, those are very generic requirements, sort of a low bar actually, if you will, for most things, just to ensure you have good contractors who have the bonds in place and insurance in place to bid the project. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
Sorry about that. I thought 19 was now, Representative Harden. You have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lax, is that right? Would you give me that code section again?
It's a 50-22-1. I think it maybe runs through 50-22-9. That basically outlines the process for selection of professional services.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Buddy. The kind of a follow-up to saying that does not happen. That's why I included the word perception. Mm-hmm. You're not on the chopping block or nothing like. Nothing. I want to make sure that we try to address what's brought to our attention or my attention, and that's one of the things. But I don't want to rush by this whole process of selecting an architect.
Okay.
And
I did not include that in my binder.
Right.
So if we need to talk about that, we'd be glad
when
to
you
do it.
select the architect, and you have 2 from GISFIC, 2 from Regents, and 1 from the local campus, I guess.
And that's for everybody except Board of Regents, because they have the staff, so they will select the architect and will participate. So really that process, I'm describing all the other agencies that don't have the staff to do that.
In that process, could you tell us specifically what does that look like? Almost as if we're architects and we're sitting, or we've submitted our information to you. What does that look like, and how objective or subjective is that selection process? For example, I would think that how much that architect is going to charge us would be a huge percentage of how you decide which one you're using. If architect A is, I don't even know if I'm going to say this right, 5% or whatever of the cost to build, his fee or hers, and the other guy's 12, walk us through that selecting the architect or selecting the design professional process.
You want
You
to,
want me to try to?
go
Take a
ahead.
stab at that?
You go ahead. First, I want to be clear, price is not a criteria at all. It's 0%.
So the architect's how much he charges us is 0% of that decision to use them.
Yeah,
Correct.
The thought behind that qualifications-based selection is that the intent is to get what appears to be the most qualified firm for the
Regardless
project
of
at hand,
price.
regardless of price, with the expectation that we will negotiate a fair and reasonable price with whoever is selected. We have kind of a range where we've seen fees fall, so it's pretty clear if you get a fee proposal that's outside that range. So we typically have a range where we would expect everybody to some, everybody's fees to come in at.
So if we could not negotiate a contract with the firm that was selected, then we would go to the number 2 ranked firm and then try to negotiate a contract with them. That rarely happens.
Which brings up a little bit of a follow-up, and how is that fair to number 2? How is that not fair, reasonable, or whatever the right word is? How is that, if I'm the number 2 guy and I'm prepared as the other guy, and you find out that when I went to that first meeting, I was already 2% lower, 3% lower, and you're like, well, welcome back to the dance. How is that? It takes thousands of dollars and time and energy from architects and designers to prepare to even submit to trying to get that job.
We hear that.
So
Regular basis.
all of a sudden, he's not going to eat that money. He's going to put that in there. That alone has the potential to elevate the price of what he's going to propose to you, because he's aware that he may be number 2 or 3 or 4. And so again, we're walking through the process of selecting the architect, and you've gotten us to the point of where price is 0% or 0 consideration in selecting that architect. And so keep walking us through what the selection process, are you scoring it
We are.
on a
We,
piece of paper? And walk us through that scoring process and what carries what weight.
Basically, the process starts with when we issue a request for qualifications, and that's posted on the DOAS, Georgia Procurement Registry. At this point, the information about the project may be somewhat limited, but in the request for qualifications, we will describe the project at hand with the information that we have. If it's a facility with laboratories, whatever the case may be, we'll describe that project. The request for qualifications basically puts the responsibility on the architect that's interested in pursuing the project to show us your qualifications. We described our project. We say we're going to make a selection based on firms that seem to be the most qualified for the project. We ask them, they basically show us your resume. If it's a lab project, show us how many academic lab buildings you've done. If it's we're doing a project over at the World Congress Center, it's heavy engineering project. Show us projects that you've got projects on your resume similar to this. There's a selection committee comprised of typically 5 people, made up of different individuals from agencies, depending on what agency it is. But that committee comes together, and there's a scoring criteria. Basically, in that first step, there's 3 categories. There's a category of stability. The category that carries the most weight is experience and qualifications, and then there's a category called suitability. In that stability category, for the most part, we typically don't see big swings in the scores there. Firms, if they've been around any number of years, they're typically viewed as stable. But really, I think where the selections, or where the scoring criteria carries the most weight, is that experience and qualifications. And we're looking for just that, the firms that seem to have the most experience with the project at hand. But a selection committee will narrow, you may get a pool of 15 firms submitting. A selection committee, and again, all this is done in accordance with that statute I mentioned, but the selection committee will narrow that pool down from, the statute says no fewer than 3, no more than 5. So we'll narrow that short list down to 3 to 5 firms. And we'll send out a notice to finalists to those firms, and those firms go forward into the next step.
Interview or whatever.
It typically involves an additional submission. We dig a little bit deeper down on the team with a written proposal and then an interview presentation process. And then that firm, the same committee typically, and that group, at that point, they're ranked and with the thought that we're going to reach out and negotiate to the highest rank.
All right,
Once you
Representative
make the
Pruitt.
short list too, the slate is clean. So at that point, everybody on the short list,
That's 1, 2, and 3, whatever.
they're all
Or-
the same.
They're all the same.
So then it comes down to their proposal and the interview.
Okay, Representative Pruitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I was late. I was with IT in my office, and when they're in there, you don't leave because they'll leave if you do, right? But thank you for your questions. I was just going to ask, would it be appropriate to ask if they have forms of letter forms and things that they send out, that we get copies of those? Would that benefit you to maybe see some of that, or us to see some of that?
Absolutely. And I think there may be some of that.
Okay, well,
What I have in the binder is for the construction process.
but it's equal to the same thing? as the
It's going to be
okay,
very similar,
All right.
really similar. So that's why I chose not to,
Okay.
but I can certainly get you those if you would like, but
If they're in here, that's fine.
why don't we go through this, and then if you still
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
would need it afterwards, I'll get that to you.
Fair enough.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Pruitt. And so we're down to the 3. We kind of went through the process, and I'm going to take a point of personal privilege again right here real quick. Representative Pruitt and then Donahue, I've already went through my apology about the short notice on the meeting, and I've taken all the blame for that. So please forgive me that I'm trying to crunch this. I know. Hey, listen, I get it. I apologize, guys. I know you are busy, and so we're going to jump back. I just didn't have a chance to apologize to them about my complacency on trying to put all this together, because Sarah and Jackie, bless their heart, they're so good to me and been patient like everybody else. But anyway, we're down to the 3, the interview portion of still selecting an architect or a design professional. You want to kind of go through what that interview process is, and I want us to select an architect is what I want us to do, and keep going.
Keep going, Jeff.
Basically, there's a second submittal, and it drills down a little bit more on their team, and we ask a little bit more about their approach.
What does that second submittal look like? What does that sound like when you do that?
We call it basically a project team proposal.
If you would turn to tab 9 in your binder,
Mm-hmm.
that proposal's from a contractor, but
It's similar.
it's going to be very similar. So it's really who's going to work on the project and what is their.
And that's the
what's their-
contractor's proposal, but the information that you sent out is asking for this kind of information.
Correct.
Correct.
It's going to be very similar.
Okay.
We'll send a notice to finalists and letting the selected, shortlisted firms know that they've been selected to go forward into the second phase. And what they're to submit in that second phase is already included in the solicitation document. We just instruct them to go to the second phase of that and basically submit those deliverables. But we drill down a little bit deeper on their team and their approach to the project. And they'll submit that the same way they submitted their qualifications, usually about a week before the interview's scheduled. That information is distributed to the committee members. They have an opportunity to take a look at that before the firms come in and go through that presentation and interview process. And then really, when they come in, everybody gets 30 minutes to make a presentation to the committee. It's followed up by about a 20-minute question and answer session. But it's their opportunity to come in and really just address the committee, basically go over the qualifications of their team, how they'd approach this thing, some ideas, maybe experiences, unique skills, things like that they bring to the table on this project. And we'll go through, if it's 3 firms, we'll go through those interviews. The committee will convene at the conclusion of those presentations, and again, it's some group discussion about the perceptions and who do you think presents the strongest team, that sort of thing. And there's another scoring matrix.
In the narrowing down to the 3 or 5, and most often do you go to 3?
No.
We try to look for a natural break point.
Yeah, I see that.
So if there's a
Yeah.
big gap
Sometimes there
between
might-
3 and 4, we'll
Yeah.
break it at 3. If
Yeah.
it's okay.
Makes perfectly good sense.
Okay.
When you do that, and if you had 15 originally, what is communicated to the ones who aren't selected about why they were not selected? Are there things that they can take away from that investment that they've made to seek that project?
There
That-
are.
Okay, what is,
We don't, we're not really in a position to be able to contact every firm. There's times we have, we could have 20 to 30 firms submit. We're not able to reach out to each one individually. We just don't have the resources, and go through why they weren't selected. What we do, and this is communicated in the solicitation document, we'll post the list of shortlisted firms on the procurement registry. The firms that Chase work with the state, they know to go there. They look. It'll say who's shortlisted. And then they have the ability to reach out to our office, and we have and will do debriefs. I've probably done hundreds of debriefs over the years.
Yeah.
If they do want to come in, they're welcome to come in. I'll sit down and explain. I may not always be able to explain to them why they weren't shortlisted, but I'm able to at least share with them why the committee viewed the firms favorably that they did. And we get a lot of good firms.
And we will
Also-
share the other firms' proposals if they want to look at what other firms submitted to try to see how they stack up. We'll be open to share that with them.
most, and then when you get down to the three and obviously select number one, again, trying to communicate back to the ones who were not selected why, I think would be a part of this conversation as we move forward. But again, perception, and I really, and I think both of you on the phone that I've talked to, I've tried to be very careful to make sure that this committee wants to convey to everyone in here what we're hearing. We have no firsthand knowledge of all of what we're saying. We're just conveying this to you. Most of the design professionals even, or of the ones that we've talked to or that have reached out to us will say, I can tell you your short list, before it's shortlisted. And again, I'm just sitting there going, how do you do that? How do you have that rabbit's foot or whatever to be able to see the future or whatever? Well, lo and behold, they bring proof. Here's who I told you the short list would be. Here's your short list. This year, they'll say, I've spent this many thousands of dollars trying to figure out a way to get on that short list. And even though we're talking about a design, bid, build, if you'll notice, the very first work that's done is still selection. And their complaint, I guess, is, or frustration is, pull the short list from the last 100 projects of similar size, and you will see the same names over and over. And again, I don't even have a thought about that. That's what y'all do. But it is a valid concern from a contractor that's trying to hard bid this. And so that's sort of where these questions are coming from. And so now we've moved past the point. Again, I just wanted to verbalize that and vocalize it so that the committee and people could hear this as we move forward. So we're moving past. We have selected an architect. Okay, we're down to an architect. However, this was very much, and I get these two words confused, so forgive me, Jackie, you'll have to get me straight. Subjective kind of a selection where there's committee members that are looking at these packets that are turned in and kind of rating them and scoring them to get a short list. And I'm not sure that maybe you don't need to interview. And again, this is just me throwing my little 2 cents in. Why don't you interview all 15? You have somebody comes in there and blows your socks off that just don't know how to turn in, that maybe just can't turn in that beautiful book with pictures and scratch and sniff that everything is just wonderful. They may not can turn in that little packet to select from, but they come in there and blow your socks off in an interview. And so that's sort of the complaint or the what's being shared with us. So take that for what it's worth. We got an architect.
Yeah, the reason we don't interview it's resources. I mean, it would take, it could take 2 to
Resources, why? Not enough money, not enough staff?
time. I mean,
Time equals
Fit-
people equals
it
money?
would take 2, possibly 3 days of tying up 5 staff people.
But if price is absolutely 0% of that selection, get you some more people. Put some more money in the budget.
That's-
If price is 0% of your consideration in selecting that person, let's get some resources. Because perhaps those additional resources may make price more of a consideration or more of a part of the conversation and pay for themselves. Possibly.
But if we are following the statute governing those selections, it clearly says no fewer than 3, no more than 5 will be considered. And also, do not get the impression price is a non-issue. It is absolutely an issue. We are expecting a fair price with whoever's selected, and we will negotiate aggressively to get a fair price. And we will move on to the next firm if we're unable to. And that's why we rarely ever get to the point we have to move on. Firms are aware that we will cut bait and move to the second firm if you don't get right with your price. So it doesn't factor into the selection, but it's very much an issue.
I'd just like to mention, this gentleman here saves the state more money than maybe anybody in the state. Because in that negotiation process, he knows what's a fair price. And he will negotiate with those firms until we feel like we've got a fair price. And we do enough projects, we know what's fair.
Well, if negotiating, the word that you just used, he negotiates
He
with,
negotiates
with that number
with that
one guy.
firm.
What are you comparing that to? I mean, because on any given day, perhaps, or any given month, my price could change $250,000.
Well, and again,
Because I'm slow on work and I finished a school or I finished a facility. My guys are starting to scramble. My subs are calling me. I need some. They're coming to me with low numbers. I'm coming to you. So how do you negotiate when you don't know what number 1, number 2, or number 3's price even is? What are you comparing that to?
again, we've got a range, and it's a valid point. But if we're following the statute that governs the selection, that's what the statute says. Asking for prices from more than one firm is prohibited by the statute, so it's just not an option for us. I think I don't know the history in Georgia, but there was a Federal Brooks Act that was passed years ago, and I think many states have kind of mirrored that act for the. Somewhere it became apparent that maybe the best price on design isn't always the best approach. If you're bidding design, you can get a low price, but you may not get the best design.
That price you negotiate will not be a solid dollar amount price, right? It'll be
Yep.
a percentage.
It's typically a set amount. It's a set fee for design.
It is a set amount, which you can equate back to a percentage.
Okay.
It's not we don't get a fee proposal that says 7% or 8% of your design. It's a fixed number. Again,
So if it's a $10 million project, an architect may submit a price of $100,000 or whatever. I'm just throwing that out there. Please don't take any numbers I say as having some facts to support it. I'm just throwing this out. But you and the architect negotiate that number.
correct.
And then he begins to design the project based on the type of school or facility or whatever that they need. That is not a percentage of the cost of the project, is what you're telling me. It is a firm commitment that that's what they're going to charge over the course of that project, barring any agreement on some
change
change orders
orders,
and different
correct.
things. And listen, that
That
I've been
happens.
there.
Right,
That
that
makes
happens.
perfectly good sense.
Right.
All right, so forgive me. I
No,
know we ain't even got to we ain't even got a plan drawn yet. But so here we are. You've hired him. He's designed this building for you, or this school, or whatever. And now we're on tab 2, where we're bids. We're
Tab 2 is strictly just the instruction to the bidders. This is what you need to submit when you submit a bid to us, the forms that you need to fill out. And then tab 3 is is a printout from our project management system. We use a system called eBuilder. So they submit the bids to us electronically. So Thursday at 2 o'clock, you better have hit the send button. So at 2 o'clock, the system shuts down. Whatever bids we've received are then tabulated, and the low bid will receive the project. In this case, Harper and Company was low bid at $3,125,700. You'll see other items listed there. We have deductive alternates. So in case the bid comes in over the budget, we've prioritized those deductive alternates. So those items possibly could come out of the project to get into bid. And then we've actually asked them to submit some unit prices in this case we have increases. Those prices have already been established and we won't have to negotiate. But it's pretty cut and dry at this point for design, bid, build, or low bid. Any questions about that?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, if you go to tab 4, this is where we're going to shift gears now and go to the CM at-risk process.
So we just
So-
covered design, bid, build.
Design, bid, build, low bid. So we talked about selecting the architect, and then, the architect's going to submit us 100% set of drawings and specifications.
Any questions on okay, I'm sorry, Representative Harden.
I just, and this just is a question that comes to my mind, why do we not permit price to be a factor in the choosing of an architect? Do you know why that was put into the law, basically?
I cannot really give you an answer to that, other than,
You don't want to take shortcuts.
Well, I'm
With-
not talking
with-
shortcuts. Now, you're
Well-
looking at all of his qualifications, but a bid in there makes it a little more competitive in the beginning. And
Okay.
you wouldn't have to use it as you wouldn't have to take the lowest bid. But I just wondered why that might not be. If you've got 2 or 3, top firms that you're looking at, let them put a price bid in on the front end. Would that? I mean, is there any reason not to? I guess is.
for me, at this point, the statute prohibits it.
Well, yeah, I knew that, and that's why I'm kind of asking why we, the legislature, did what we did.
We
I
ask
guess.
up here why
I don't know why you
a
guys
lot. There's a lot of things, we
Right.
just want to know why.
We just feel like let's hire the most qualified firm, and if we can negotiate a fair price at that point, then that's the best process.
Well, and again, you'll hear people say, and I'm sorry, Mr. Harden, that
Well, I guess, and do you think then that possibly to put the price in there might be a problem in selecting the best firm?
I do.
Yeah, I think there's
Okay.
oftentimes, even when you get to a short list, it's not uncommon, you may get down to 3 firms, and for one reason or another, one of those firms just really seems to separate themselves from the other 2 in the interview process. It's not as apparent until you get into that interview process. For one reason or another, it could be some unique characteristics about the project, and they've got people on their team. It may be the only firm that really has that kind of experience. So oftentimes, a firm will really kind of stand out, and it could be, a firm could be a few dollars less over here if you actually ask for a price to factor in, but they may not be the best firm for the project. And I think that, as much as anything,
Thank you.
maybe the reasoning behind it.
And that's one of the reasons I've started off these meetings. The responsibility of the legislature constitutionally is not just to pass a budget, but to pass a balanced budget. And we brag all the time about this AAA bond rating and the good interest rates that gives us, et cetera, and the amount of money, additional resources that will allow us to have down the road. But yet, when you start bidding out 80% of $1.56 billion construction management, and then the other percentage, minus 5%, is design, bid, build. But it sounds to me like 95% of the design professionals are selected, not hard bid. Would that be fair?
They're 100% selected based on their qualifications.
100% selected
No matter
with
what-
zero price
No
considered.
matter what process we use on that chart I gave you at the first meeting.
Okay, Representative Pruitt is ready to rumble down there.
Have maybe I'm wrong, but for instance, are you involved with schools that are built out in the state?
K through 12,
Yeah.
we are not.
Okay, so that's what threw me off, because I knew that K through 12, the counties, the school board selects the architect and not the state. So can you tell us maybe, and maybe we've already been through this, but maybe to help, what are the things that you would be involved in, or the state and your department would be involved in? Since schools are not a part of it, what are the things that the state?
It's pretty much everything else.
Everything
really.
else.
Okay.
It's Board of Regents projects.
But I thought Board of Regents had their own, they'd select their own
They
architect.
do, but
So-
we're typically one of the voting members on their
Okay.
panel, and the process is exactly the same.
Okay,
It doesn't, we're very consistent on that. Technical colleges, corrections, Department of Juvenile Justice, Department of Natural Resources.
okay. So pretty much everything, but.
But believe it or not, DOT is actually our third largest customer now. So
Really?
welcome centers, rest areas, they're building some district offices. So they don't have any expertise in vertical construction, so they come to us for that expertise.
And one last question, if I could.
Yes, sir.
How much spread do you see between architects when they give you a quote on what they're gonna charge? Isn't it almost identical the same? Don't they charge almost the same, all of them? There's, and let me throw one more thing in. Also, one of the major things, I'm sure, is a architect, as far as him giving you the best price, is because, and I just know this to be a fact, in schools, I don't know about other things, but what they do, once they draw a plan and they actually build it somewhere, it's just repetitious. There's some things that have to be changed, but that architect is gonna have, if he's done this type work and he's got experience in it and he can duplicate a lot of things he's already spent so much time on, then 90% of the time he's gonna have the same or equal to, or maybe a little bit better price than others have that haven't done that. The other thing is, qualifications, like you said, they have to have done something similar to this before. And one of the questions that our chairman always brings up is, well, what if they don't? How do they ever get to that level? And so maybe I'm out of question by asking this at this current time, but how did they work themselves up to get to a point that they are then qualified into doing something that maybe they haven't done just like it? Are there, let's take, for instance, a prison. If they've done a small jail that had multiple cells in it, then that gives them, you say, okay, well, they've done something similar, maybe not this much in cost, but that could give you cause to think that they had enough experience to maybe bid on it.
That's
But
correct.
somebody that had always done, and prisons are a whole lot different than anything else you'll do. I'm telling you, and of course you know that already without me saying it, but a lot of people up here may not. But somebody that's done these rest stops certainly probably wouldn't fit into a category of somebody that you needed to do a prison. But regardless of that, aren't the architectural fees for prisons or schools or like kind work, isn't it almost always the same, or is it not? I don't know, because I've never sat in on one of the meetings. I just assumed it was.
Take a stab at that?
It's typically what we're seeing. If it's academic buildings, is the fees are typically in a pretty tight range. And if we get a proposal that's out of that range, we'll have that discussion with the thought that.
So if you have an architect that you really like and you prefer his design and his ideas, you kind of negotiate with him to bring him back down to the standard of what you normally would pay?
Exactly.
Okay. And is architect also chosen by, because I know I'm talking about schools and prisons both, but you can go to a prison and you can see which architect did it because of their past experience. But I know if you decide to build a school, and I know you're not involved in K through 12, but I'm familiar with that, but some of them can do it for $60 a square foot. And you can say, well, I know this architect, and I've seen this work over the years, or aware of it, and his schools usually come in at $60 or $100 a square foot. Or another architect, his work comes in at $200 or $300 a square foot. So if you pick the architect that had the lowest bid on his part, but the project's gonna run twice what it is with another architect that charges a little bit more because his square footage price, well, in Dodge County, we know how much money we have available, and we can't build a $300 per square foot school. But other places can, because we only have a certain amount of money to use. So we have to use an architect that designs a school on that level per square foot price. I guess that's what I was getting at. So I'm asking you, wouldn't it be, I guess that's what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, it's not always about the architectural fee, because in the long run, it could cost way more per square foot, maybe if that particular architect has never done one before or doesn't show a history of square footage price maybe or something. So I'm throwing another wrinkle in it.
No, one of the bigger points I think you're making, Mr. Pruitt, is how different schools are from technical college facilities, regents, and all this. And that's why we have someone here to kind of maybe help us better understand a little bit about that. But the answer to sort of the concern that I relayed was 100% is selection, whether it's design, bid, build, whether it's select, build, whether it is design, bid, or whether it is construction management. And so one of the things that Representative Pruitt mentioned was back to that price thing. In schools, that percentage is still not a factor until after that design professional selected. They may put an envelope on the table or whatever their submittal is that says 12%. They haven't even started talking about price yet, the price of the school, all of that. They haven't even started talking about it yet. So if he puts a number of 10% for his cost to oversee this project, design it, and oversee it, you never even know what number 2 is.
Where does that come in the process? Is that in the first step?
But now we're talking about schools, and so in theirs it may be a little bit different. But in schools, that price, that percentage and all will not be discussed until after they choose. And they don't negotiate like you do. The school board is almost purely at the mercy of what the design professional, to some degree, but taking his advice or her advice of what they're looking for and what they're going to build. So we just need to make sure that we differentiate between everyone else and the way that this is passed through Department of Education to school systems to do projects. Were you going to say something?
I don't know if this has any, if this would maybe clear anything up, but I don't know of any projects that we go into when we facilitate a design, selection, or construction, whatever the case may be. We have a set budget. We've got, whether it's $1 million, whether it's $20 million, we've got a finite amount. The architect's not just, it's not, hey, go out and design and we're not sure if he's going to come in over or under budget. There's an expectation. He knows going in what our stated cost limitation will be, and he's expected to design, he or she, the firm, is expected to design a project that could be reasonably constructed within that number. If that, I don't know if that helps.
Right. And then that usually is that maximum allowable whatever.
Well,
what do they call it?
it's really, you set that number for us when you authorize the project
And why do we do that?
based on the requests that the agencies are submitting to you. So you either accept that.
Who's approving their number to submit to us?
Office of Planning and Budget.
Okay. In working closely with what the experience or past for the Georgia State Finance and Investment Commission.
Correct.
So don't put it back on us. These numbers aren't just coming out of thin air for this legislature. These numbers have been worked carefully as best we can narrow it down, and we certainly don't want to appropriate $10 million on a $14 million project. And so what we hope is that if that number is around 10 million, then you'll see that number come up through the budget process, through the campus president, through the technical college system, Georgia State Finance. So in saying that, but keep going, and I apologize, but this is, I tell you, I've said this is terribly complicated in general, and especially when you start separating Department of Education from Regents, Technical College System, Department of Transportation. So I'm trying to remember where we were. Where we were fixing to transition over to construction management,
Correct.
and we were leaving the design bid build.
That's
And-
where I'm proposing to go. but
And if you'll notice, and
I'm
one
at your
thing,
pleasure,
the
so.
one thing I did want to mention is, and again, this is not a jab or anything, but had I not asked the question about how that architect was selected, it took about 1 minute to go through design bid build.
It's pretty.
1 minute. We spent about 15 or 20 minutes talking about the selection process of that design professional and architect and all those steps and whether it's subjective or objective, et cetera. So we're on tab 5. We're transitioning over to construction,
We're
4, I'm
on
sorry.
Tab 4.
I'm sorry, 4, you're right.
Tab 4.
Keep me straight. So keep going.
So what you're gonna see here is a request for qualifications. So this is the first submission that we're gonna receive from any interested, construction manager. If you look at, page 3, you'll notice that we, under bullet number 2, we have a list of minimum qualifications. So to propose on this project, you're at least gonna need to meet this criteria for this project. This happens to be a technical college system project at North Georgia Technical School in Clarksville. If you look at page 4, you're gonna see in yellow the 3 criteria that we're gonna use in shortlisting the contractor. So everybody with me? Tab 4, page 4. You're gonna see some highlighted criteria. Looks like that. Everybody with me? This may be the most important thing I tell you today, is this page right here. So last time you were talking a lot about the criteria.
Yes, sir.
So Jeff talked about similar criteria for the design professional. It parallels very nicely for the contract manager. 30% on stability, 40% on their experience and qualifications, and 30% on suitability. And there's some descriptions about each of those categories. So we're using this criteria just to shortlist. At that point, the rules change.
Just to shortlist whom? Construction
Contract-
managers or?
Construction managers.
So in the construction management delivery method, have we selected that design professional already?
Yep.
Same way we did the other?
Same way we did the other one.
And so
Exact same way.
how much of input does that design professional or architect have in this formula? 30, 40, 30?
None.
Zero. They have zero input. The design professional in a construction management delivery method has zero input in the criteria or qualifications for a construction manager.
We control that entirely ourselves.
Okay. And now we're talking about these GISFIC projects. We're not
GISFIC.
talking about DOE.
I can't.
Okay, I'm
I
sorry.
can't.
And-
That's correct.
And so then you're going to select, you've already selected the architect design professional just like you did on the design
Right.
bid build. And
Right.
these are the qualifications that you will put on your website or whatever for this project.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's talk about timing a little bit. We tried within maybe 4, 6, 8 weeks after we select the architect, we want to select the contractor.
Okay.
So the plans and specs have hardly been developed at all. And the reason we do that is we want input from the contractor into the design. We want them to work in collaboration
Input from the contractor or the construction manager?
Well, in this case, I'm using the.
But the
term-
construction manager does very little or none of the work,
That's correct, physical work.
physical work, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say it like that.
Right.
They do a lot of work.
Right.
But,
So we call this initial interact, we call it pre-construction.
Mm-hmm.
So they work collaboratively with the architect in the design.
and the owner.
And they prepare budgets, estimates along the way to make sure that we're staying within that amount that you have authorized.
And so they have
that-
started the process of designing the project with the owner and GISFIC. And we still haven't talked about price with anyone.
No, I probably should get through
Okay,
that
go ahead.
process before.
Okay.
So, based on these three factors, we're gonna score the proposals that the construction manager, or the qualifications that they have sent us. So, there's a lot of description on page 5, 6, and 7. We're asking them specifically, when you submit your qualifications, make sure you include all this information in your qualification submission.
We described the project in that request for qualifications document, and we asked them to demonstrate that they've got experience with those.
Do they know roughly what size project this is by this point?
We tell them exactly.
And what, I mean, when I say size, I mean dollar amount?
Yep, we tell them exactly.
Where in this, oh, I see, is that the 11,005,700?
Yep, that's it.
And so that is the stated cost limitation, or SCL?
Yep.
And so you'll start getting people looking at it based on that number alone sometimes, because it kind of gives them an idea of the size and scope and that kind of thing.
We feel it's beneficial to put that number
Oh, yeah.
out there, because that may be too small for some firms and too large for another, so they can make a business decision.
Have you noticed, though, and somebody asked this before, and so I'm going to echo that. I forget who it was, but have you noticed that it almost always comes in right at that 11,005,000 number?
Yep, and to be honest with you, the process is set up to be that way.
What if we tweaked it and said 10-2? Just tightened it down right off the bat. And somebody comes in and says, hey, by the way, you can't do it for 10-2. And everybody shows up. You know what I mean? And so, again, keep going.
My question would be, what are you gonna do with the extra money?
We're having extra money given back to them now, in some cases.
So,
Contingency.
I mean, so, but that's the amount you've given the school, so they're gonna try to
I think the
build
thought-
something.
The thought with the using agency, if you give them 12 million, it's the thought that we want to try to get as much program as we can for 12 million. Oftentimes, the 12 million, oftentimes, maybe they have a $14 million program, but they've only got $12 million to work with, so they're having to scale back.
Right,
But
that's
they will
right.
try to, I mean, they want to try to take that money as far as they can take it and do as much with it as they possibly can.
That's right.
We're trying to get as much square foot out of the
Absolutely.
building as we can. And we're not trying to we're not trying to build elaborate buildings. We're trying to build functional space. Okay, so if you turn to tab 5, I've included a proposal. In this case, it was from the winning firm. So we received 7 proposals on this one. I only included one in your book. I've got the other 6 back there if you'd like to look at them, but they're pretty much representative of the process. So if you look at tab 6, these are the guidelines that Jeff's team present to the panel members. So they need to read this before they read the proposal. So this is the rules of the road for the 5 committee members as they review, in this case, the 7 proposals submitted by the construction managers. So we're giving them clear guidance and what you can expect and how you should approach your review of this project.
And we've shared with them in here exactly what we've asked the firms to submit to them.
Did you give us and is that it, the scorer one? That's the sheet where they go through the suitability,
Yep.
Okay.
Hold on, I'm going to get there. I also would like you to turn to the last page of tab 6. We require our selection committee members to sign this statement. And I'll read you a statement. In doing so, GISVIC asks that you carry out your duties fairly without bias or favoritism, and that you conduct yourself while serving on the selection committee solely for the public good, striving vigilantly to avoid even the appearance that your actions are motivated by private or personal interest. And then there's 5 statements there that if they can't check the box. So we want to make sure that
Yeah.
if somebody from these firms is, that's your brother, well, then you need to recuse yourself because you won't be able to sign this statement.
And that's a document that is given to every committee member on every project.
Yes, sir.
So if you have 2 from GISVIC, they don't just sign one blanket document.
They sign this
Each
every-
document is specific to each project. So the 2 from Regents or the 2 from Technical College System and the 2 from GISVIC have to sign and have in the file one of these. So some of these things are subject to audit and they go back and audit this. They just select 20 projects randomly and go back and audit them. There is a signed statement like this from every committee member on every project.
We ask every committee member on every project to sign one. I couldn't sit here and honestly say that if you went back in every file, that there's one of those from every committee member, but we asked them to sign them.
Right. I noticed just while we were talking, we have to sign for committee days, a different one for every committee day that we use. Today, these members will get per diem committee day. You have to sign one every single time, saying that, yes, I went to Atlanta or went somewhere. And so that's really what sparked that question, not calling into question your committee members. So, but I do think that is important because that's well written. I've read one of those, and that's important because a person's conscience is pretty strong most times. And so,
Committees are made up of different people from one project to the next, so
Right.
They may not be signing quite as many as you guys are signing.
right. Okay.
Okay, now turn to tab 7. And we didn't use names. In this case, each person is just called scorer 1 through scorer 5. So each person, each scorer is going to give a number. So again, the 30, 40, and 30 for stability, experience, and suitability. So a maximum score for stability in this case would be 30. Maximum score for experience and qualifications would be 40. So this is how scorer 1 ranked the 7 proposals. And then if you notice, there's a ranking. That becomes important later. So they're based on their score, they're ranked 1 through 7, with 1 being the highest ranked firm with the total highest score. So all 5 scores do that. And then if you look at the last page in tab 7, it's our tabulation of the 5 scores. So we don't total up the score, we total up the rankings. Because, Chairman, you may be a high scorer, and I kind of scored low. So that normalizes it.
What does
So-
what does my score sheet look like if I'm one of the committee members? What you've shared with us is a total of the committee, the panel's numbers.
Their sheet looks exactly like this, except they're handwriting them in, and then Jeff takes that
how do, give me an example, give us, I'm sorry, an example of we're sitting there looking at the stability of a firm. Could my number, could all those numbers be different? Why is it that Dominic is scoring the stability of a firm 2 points lower than Representative Harden? Where, I guess, that's subjective, right?
That's subjective.
Okay, keep me straight on it. Where, how, I'm still, that's a little bit of what's confusing some of the perception. And again, please hear me when I say, we hope to try to dispel some of this perception. When there's a 5-person panel and my local president of the college never built a building in his or her life, never been in construction, they're not with the technical college, you know, I mean, they're not, you know what I'm saying? And they say, well, golly, man, boy, he looks pretty stable. I'm going to give that joker a, what's the numbers? I mean, is it 1 through 5? Is it 1 through 50? What's my, as a scorer, what are my,
1 through 30.
all right, as an individual scorer, I can give them a 30.
You can.
Okay. And so I say, man, they look pretty stable to me. I give them a 30. Well, and then a guy that's a lot more stable, maybe it doesn't look as, they give them a 20. You see what my question is? I think I used the example in our first meeting about I drive a white Chevrolet truck like a lot of other boys in South Georgia. How clean is my truck? Is it a 2 clean? Where I'm from, mine right now is clean and it's muddy, you know. So help me understand that scoring process and the subjective sort of reasoning behind everybody scoring it different.
Well, I mean, obviously, the committee's made up of people, and I told somebody one time, I said, one of the challenges of these committees is it is made up of people. But
Right.
what we typically see, and what I hope I'm seeing, is if you've got some mark of where your truck is at a possible a score of 30, if you think yours is a 28, we're hoping that you're looking at the other trucks in the same light, that you would score them the same way. A truck basically as clean as yours, hopefully we get a 28. If the guy down the road happened to have a cleaner truck, maybe he gets a 29 or 30. So we'd like to think that whatever your perceptions, your biases, whatever the case may be, however you view things, that at least you're, as an individual committee member, at least you're consistent across the board. It may not be consistent with the person sitting beside you at the table, but hopefully, again, however they're scoring these or assigning scores is at least consistent for their score sheet. And again, if your number one firm had a perfect score of 100 and another committee firm had a perfect, or their number one firm had a score of 80, that 80 and that 100 carry the same weight. It's still a number one ranking. And then at the end of this process, the overall ranking is a sum of those individual rankings. So if with 5 voting members, if for some reason, if all 5 voting members had a firm as their number one ranked firm, regardless of the score you had assigned to it, that firm would end up with a score of 5. That's as good as anybody can do on any selection.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
golf, low score wins.
All right. Well, Representative Pruitt, I think, has a question real quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. Do you use things like the Dun & Bradstreet report and for credit ratings and things like that, their history, and also things like their current workload versus their average workload that they normally carry for their company? Are they already, where are they right now with their workload, and is this going to overload them? Or, I mean, is that part of their presentation? Is that some of the questions that you ask? But they're not on paper. I'm just asking, does your committee do that, or do you have a questionnaire?
You're kind of jumping ahead to the second
All right,
part
I'll
of the
hush then.
process.
All right.
Valid question, if you can just hold that.
Okay, good.
Okay. At this point, we're just kind of scoring them on
Okay.
I thought it might come under stability.
it.
We usually see that in the second step.
Yeah.
We're kind of, to get to that short list, you're taking what appear to be the most qualified firms, and then we drill down a little deeper in that second step, and that's.
Well, I understand, Mr. Chairman, with you is that what is considered stability? I mean, so that's what I was kind of getting at there.
Right, and
I'm
I
sorry,
think
but-
What we typically, in this category, and we have this discussion with the committee members, we'll say, look, guys, we we don't typically see big swings in the scores in this stability category unless there's some reason for a firm to maybe score lower than the other firms in stability. Some of the things, for example, if our project is a $10 million project and a firm's revenues for the last 5 years have been $3 million, they may not be viewed quite as and maybe stability isn't the right way to put it, but and if say if a firm's been in business for 18 months and they're competing against firms that have been around 30, 50 years, those are the kind of things that come into play. If their bonding capacity is less than the value of our project, those are the kind of things that come into play. In that stability category, it's really more red flags than anything else.
They're allowed to bid it if their bonding capability, I mean, I can't even imagine them showing up. You put $5,700 on there and they can't bond to but $8 million and they're gonna show up. I can't even fathom that.
You might be surprised. But that was one reason in our document, we started listing those minimum qualifications.
Yeah.
And if we know we got a $10 million project, we will say you have to provide evidence that you can bond at least a $10 million project. So
I was really trying to get help, Mr. Chairman, about trying to drill down a little bit as to what stability was. I guess.
Absolutely, and I think we
If you
could
go to
go,
tab 6, go to the second page. Tab 6, second page. Everything where you see an A is that stability. So this is all the information that we're asking from them to submit so that the committee members can score it based on their interpretation of this criteria, comparing that versus what was submitted by the CM. So it's pretty well spelled out here what we're looking for.
Okay, very good.
So there's a page and a half. I mean, it even goes to page 3.
and all of the committee members are reviewing that very same submittal of stability information or stability portion of that packet.
This is a guide that they send to each committee member. So guide for selection committee members specifically for this project.
And then if you have 30, 40, 30, I want to touch on this word that you've used a few times, the ranking.
Normalize them.
So, yeah, I want to try to, in addition to trying to wrap our minds around how every committee member on the panel could have a different score under stability, qualifications, and
Okay.
suitability.
Yep.
Every committee member can have a different score on that. Then you go 30, 40, 30, and I noticed that in this particular proposal we had, and I'm just reading it straight off the page, that it went to rankings, and you had Reeves had the number 1 ranking, but if you flip back to the first sheet, up there, we had Alex Building Corporation of Georgia ranked 65. I mean, their score was 65, but their ranking was higher than Ajax Building Corporation of Georgia. You see what I'm saying? Ajax Building Corporation.
Let's slow down. Let's look at scorer 1. Let's walk through those because this is really important. All right.
And that just caught my eye, and you just have to
Let's look
clarify
at
it.
the first firm, Ajax Building Corporation for scorer 1, right? And this is just how scorer 1 views it. They gave them 25 out of 30 for stability. They gave them 25 out of 40 for experience, and they gave them 20 out of 30 for suitability, all right? That totals a total score of 70. So they did that same thing for the other 6 firms. So, the scores ranked from 70, 65, 80, 80, 60, 65, 85. 85 happened to be, in this case, the highest score, which was Reeves Young.
Which gets the lowest ranking.
Therefore, they get a ranking of 1.
That's the best ranking.
In that case, it's the best ranking.
Right. Lower ranking, but higher score.
correct.
Correct.
And
So
when you
rankings, keep in mind, we're playing golf now. Low score wins, so keep that in mind.
right, so let's take Reeves out of there
Yep,
for just a minute.
all right.
And I see a score of 80 and 80 on Brassfield and Gorey, I guess I'm pronouncing that right, Corey Daniel Construction. 2 80s.
Right.
2 rankings of 2.
Right. We had a no ranking of 3 in this case.
What do we do?
What?
What do we, well, I mean, if you take the number 1 ranking out, just hypothetically, and you drop back to something happens and they fold and something doesn't work out.
Great question. Keep in mind, this is just one score.
Right. Yeah,
Okay, so we're adding up the 5 scores to get a composite or total ranking. So in this case, it doesn't matter if they tie. The only time.
oh, so you're saying scorer 1 is 1 member, 1 committee person?
Scorer 1 is 1 member.
All right, then,
It's Joe. for
okay,
this case.
I like Joe. Joe, I always think about Joe the plumber. Man, he made a splash.
Scorer 2 is Bill.
Now look at Joe on look at Joe on Ajax Builder, and then look at Bill on Ajax Builder.
Yep.
25, 25, 20, 30, 37, 28. Oh my Lord. That's enough to go from worst to first. If you had that kind of a differentiation between what Joe scores and what Bill scores. Am I misspeaking? Am I saying that wrong?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. Look at all of scorer 2's scores. They're just a higher, they're just a grader that's always sort of towards the top, right? So that's exactly why we come up with the rankings. All their scores are pretty high, really.
But doesn't it
Much-
skew
much
the
higher.
overall? Well, doesn't that end up skewing the overall ranking
No,
in the end?
stick with me now. So look at scorer 2, we end up coming with a ranking on the right-hand column, correct? So it doesn't matter how high they score them, you still have to rank them. So in this case, Ajax was the 3rd ranked firm. Reeves Young had a 2 ranking in this case.
Yeah, what he's saying is,
Yeah, but now Carol Daniel, we can just keep flipping pages because I really want this committee to understand this. Carol Daniel Construction Company on number 4, scorer 4, ranked 6.
Correct.
Joe ranked them a number 2. That is a crazy jump. And again, I'm just going back to the subjective nature of how this works. If you go scorer 1 ranked them a number 2, and scorer number 4 ranks them a number 6, surely you can't tell me or this committee that does not have an impact in the overall rankings. Now, you still may come up with number 1, granted. But in 2, 3, and 4, which in this case is, Albion, Brassfield, Carroll, Daniel, Cooper, you're getting jumps in there of rankings that are just, I can't fathom how one scorer ranks someone a 6 and another scorer ranks them a 2, just a smidgen behind number 1. Number 1 was an 85, number 2 was an 80. And so I really want this committee to understand deeply about this selection process. Let me get Representative Donahue's got a comment.
Yep.
Real quick, want to make sure I follow along. We go back to the first page, scorer 1. Let's just look at number 2. At that time, it's Brassfield and Gorey and Carol Daniels. Okay. Do you ever have this that comes into play if you go through the whole process and you have everybody comes into a number 2 basically, and that's who you're going to pick. But you have like 2 people, those 2 come in to a number 2 ranking. One's maybe a 2. How do you decide who you're going to pick? Do you negotiate with these 2?
No. Great question. In this case, it wouldn't be a 2 ranking, it'd be a 1 ranking.
Okay.
All right, so it'd be the 2 most qualified firms.
Okay.
The 5-member committee will deliberate and pick one of the 2.
Okay. And then you'll negotiate to bring them down to where the parameters are that we really need them to be, and they already know what the parameters roughly are.
Well, we'll negotiate a contract with them at that
Right.
point.
Correct.
Thank you.
Right.
And when you
But at this
say,
point, we're just shortlisting the firms that we're going to interview, so I want you to keep that in mind.
right, they haven't talked about the
Second.
11,005,000 yet. We know that that is the
You know
limit.
that, but we're just getting a short list.
Right, and we have not talked about the fact that when you do narrow this down,
Right.
that is where the design professional or architect comes into play on the selection of the construction manager.
No.
How does he not? What are they bidding? What are they coming in there to interview on?
The,
I mean, they know roughly what the price is and kind of what the building is, but once we get a short list, the design professional or architect's already at the table.
They're typically.
They don't
more
vote.
times than not, they're under contract.
They're under contract on this project,
Correct.
and you've already negotiated a dollar amount or percentage. Under construction management, it is percentage, right? Under design, bid, build, they give you a hard number, but under construction management, the design professional gives you a percentage,
Well,
5 or 7 or 8 or whatever,
it's always just a fixed fee.
which is a percentage of the 11.
Yeah,
Okay,
it
so
can be
whatever.
equated
Yeah,
to-
okay, I'm with you. And so they come up with that number.
Yeah.
Then they start to design this project. Surely they've already started designing this project.
barely.
Okay, barely.
They probably aren't even past schematic design.
And so, and again, that almost opens up a whole nother line of questioning as far as how does a construction manager come to the table feeling confident that even working with the owner and the design professional, that they are going to be able to finish this project to completion inside of your number? Because surely somebody has an idea or a picture in their mind of what this is going to look like. And so the architect is not helping you determine what the qualifications of the construction manager is?
No.
This is going to, I think this is considered one of the advantages of the CM process. It's a good question, it's a good point, and that's part of what the CM process is about. Getting the construction manager on board early, before the design is down the road a ways. Getting that construction manager on the team, sitting at the table with the owner and the architect, and the owner's got a 100,000 square foot building they'd like to build it. And these construction managers, I mean, this is what they do. They've got general ideas of cost of construction. They're able to bring that knowledge to the table. They're able to make sure, working in conjunction with the team and the designer, that the designer's not, one, gonna over-design a building that we can't afford, and at the same time, they're not gonna under-design a building. You design something that came in, we gave up program for a building that now costs $5 million less than what we had. We really needed that program. So with the CM at the table, it helps us to maximize, we feel like it helps us to maximize the program and take that project as far as we can with the funds that we've got. And they're providing cost estimates along the way to kind of keep that cost in check. If that helps.
It does, and on change orders. And again, this is a jump, so forgive me, but he's barely started designing the project. You're in the process of selecting a construction manager. You choose a construction manager based on the ranking that is derived from the total score that clearly is very subjective. Just based on the ones you've given us. From a ranking from a 2 to a 6 could be the difference in me winning that project or not. I say winning, I don't even know if that's the right word, of being chosen as the construction manager.
Keep in mind, in this case, we're just trying to get to a short list. So I actually want to go
Well,
back to
if
your
I don't get
point.
on the
If
short
they were
list-
two were tied, we'd let both interview. I kind of jumped ahead in my mind.
But
So
if-
I wanted to go back to your question.
If the
I
short
don't think
list
I
is
answered.
3, at what point do you hadn't decided 3 or 5 yet?
Correct.
So let's just say it's 5. And I missed the short list by a ranking of 1. that could have been the difference in all of those scores of my scorers. And I'm sitting there scratching my head going, man, I should have been able to be at the interview.
Let's go to the last page.
Okay? And
You bring
in
up
tab
the-
7.
In tab 7, correct. This is the overall tabulation of all 5 scores. So, you know, Frank, Bill, Joe, Susie, and Mary, all right? So we've added up all the rankings. Again, we did not add up the scores, we added up the rankings. So in this case, Reeves Young had a total sum of rankings of 9, which made them the lowest ranked firm. So if you add up all the rankings in this case, we had a 9, 13, 15, 16, 22, 27, and 25. The committee chose to make a break point at 16 because there was a pretty good gap between 16 and 22. So they chose to interview 4 firms. If there would have been a 17 there, my guess is that committee would have interviewed 5 firms.
So the break point at that one was 3.
4.
4, I'm sorry. You're right. 4.
9, 13, 15, so there was a 6-point difference between 16 and 22. So they thought that was a big enough gap that we're just going to interview 4 firms.
But that, and again, I apologize. I know y'all leave here thinking I'm gonna cut my wrist, but doesn't that ranking differential that I mentioned between a 2 and a 6 possibly shed some light on why there's such a big jump from 4 to 5?
Possibly.
But that's not taken into consideration. I mean,
We add up every score.
so if you're
Why'd you
not
buy a Chevy truck?
not only are you getting to select subjectively the
Why'd you buy a Chevy truck? No, I'm serious now. This is important.
absolutely period affordability and customer service. The guy I bought it from gives me a great price, nobody can compete, and I got it serviced yesterday, don't cost me a dime. He does the oil change and all as long as I'll bring it back to him. So anyway,
My son-in-law works for Ford, so I'm going to buy a Ford.
and so, but price, we ain't even talked about price yet. I said price first,
But see, that, right, that's important to you.
and we haven't even talked about price
That's
yet.
important to you.
So
It wasn't important to me. It's more important that my son-in-law.
not only is it subjective of how you
Okay.
scored these things, okay? But the score is where I get the ranking from, but you also subjectively get to decide the breaking point for the short list.
Correct.
I tell you what, I've sat in many of these, and I tell you what, it's pretty common. You have 5 members on the committee. It's rare that, it's common that a firm will come in, will be, they've submitted qualifications. I've got an agency over here who used this firm a couple years ago, and it went great. I've got a project manager over here with a different agency that used this same firm, and it didn't go so well. So oftentimes, you got people on the committee with different experiences with the same firm, and I think you see that reflected in the score sometimes.
Back to the truck comment. That's my money. I buy it where I want to. This ain't my money. That 1.56 billion you're using is not yours.
We treat it like it's ours.
But it's not fair to use my purchase of a truck with my money. I don't have to decide. It's my money. I can stroke a check to a brother if I want to.
Okay.
The state can't. And so, Mr. Donahue.
Asked a question again here. My son-in-law works for a pretty big electrical company, so he does a lot of the schools. And with that, I've noticed there's a certain company, and just happens one of them is on this list, that does most of the schools. However, if they win 8 out of 10, then I've noticed also that the other construction company that came in to build that school, they ran behind on everything that they were supposed to do from due date on delivery. they had more problems than the one that has done 8 in a row. Not to say I'm on the side of the 8 in a row, but when they looked at the cost factor, it cost them more money for overruns and it cost them more money for delays. And with that, I guess looking here, I want to ask the question, Reeves and Young was pretty much first on page 1, and they finished up first in the rankings. Is that consistent in the state? You would see a group, and I'm just picking on here from a number, that they're pretty much ranked number 1 throughout, or would you say they're in the top 3 throughout?
Across the board from project to project?
Yes, sir.
I don't know of any one firm that typically is in the top 3 on any number of projects. So the projects are different. I mean, some of the larger projects, there's a pool of firms that you might see consistently, but or semi-consistently, some degree of consistency. But no, we see things any number of things come into play. Size of project,
Location of project,
Right.
how much work they have.
an agency's experience with that given firm. And again, I think that's one reason you see some of the maybe members on the same committee scoring them differently. Somebody on that committee may have had a really good experience with a firm, same firm, a completely different team over here on another project that didn't go as well. So I think that's
And that's what I've noticed, where you have a problem with, here I go in to do my job. Everything's lined up, and then there's a new construction manager on this new company that has no clue. He's way over his head. And then he makes decisions that now the plumbing situation, the electrical situation, all of these come together, and it just seems that I've noticed in my area the proven ones are the ones coming through consistently. And you're right, you can drive in and tell who built that school. But I've toured all the schools during building. I've gone through, I'm the one asked those questions. I don't care who you are. I'm a businessman. I want to make sure that bottom line always isn't the cheapest. I want to make sure the results are what I asked for. And I just noticed this, and Dominic's keeping this ball rolling on a lot of things, and I compliment you and appreciate what you're trying to accomplish there. I just want to know, and I'll ask very few questions, but I do appreciate all your research and everything, but I just noticed numbers like that. I like to know if it's a consistency statewide or not. Thank you, sir.
It would, and again, this is just sort of a follow-up comment of mine. If they're building technical college facilities, even remotely in this price range, the only person on that committee that changes would be the local person. Is it the same committee members each time? All right, now, then that brings up another question. Maybe tell this committee about the resume of those committee members. Are they architects? Are they general contractors? Are they experienced in construction management, working in it? Or, and the local person, the president of the local technical college or state college, whatever.
Right. Well,
A little bit about those committee
okay,
members,
good-
maybe.
Good question. Let's take this technical college system project, for example. There'll be 2 committee members from Georgia State Financing Investment Commission.
we usually have. It's typically always our project manager that's assigned to the
Right.
project.
We're gonna have a project manager assigned to that job, so that person will get a vote. It could be another project manager in our office won't be assigned to the project, but has experience with similar type projects. We also have folks out in the field, if they're available. So it's staff members that know the process, that have built a lot of projects for the state. The 2 people from the technical college system, a lot of times it's Sarah. You vote a lot, right? She's their, director of facilities, and then she has a staff person that manages projects all over the state. So, and then the person at the campus could vary. It could be their facility director. It could be the president. Could be the vice president. Could be
Is there a way
Could
to-
be the dean of the school. I mean, for Jim's campuses, it's usually somebody very familiar with facilities. The campus president doesn't get involved in.
Is there a way to research or look at the different projects that are completed, pull the score sheets, and look at how maybe the same committee member, Joe, voted differently on the same companies. Because I can't imagine, kind of to piggyback off of Representative Donahue's question, I can't imagine that the same committee member would say that their suitability and qualifications and all would be different on reasonably similar projects. If you pulled Joe on 5 projects between 10 and 20 million, and you looked at the same contractors, I can't imagine. That brings into question a whole nother level of subjectivity or whatever on how they're scoring these things.
The answer to your question is yes, that can be done, but I would challenge you to the results of that. I can say there's probably 2 or 3 companies that 3 or 4 years ago I would say are outstanding companies. The last job they did for us did not go so well, and their company's fallen apart. So just because I voted for Company A 3 or 4 years ago doesn't mean I should vote for Company A
But
this
you-
year because of various reasons.
But surely,
This business changes fast.
but surely you would have enough confidence in us to take that into consideration as we audited or reviewed or looked over these past score sheets. We certainly, and again, I always say this, I'm just an old country boy from South Georgia, but I totally trust these legislators to look at the variables, you know, because I've said this all along. I can't imagine some of these people even showing up to bid them, you know, that have fallen or had
Yeah.
problems. Representative, I'm sorry. Right here, we got a question.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've participated in probably literally hundreds of these selection process over my 30-year career in architecture and working at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and now here at the system office. I just want to mention that the interview process is absolutely critical to this process. Most firms have an A team, a B team, and a C team, and very often, if they're busy, you may have the B team show up or the C team, and it's very important. The interviews are probably the most critical part of the whole process because people can put things on paper and look really good on paper, and when they show up, if their project manager is very reticent or very hesitant to talk, or if the principal of the firm is not there but they sent their third-rate architect to the interview, you know they're not that interested in the project or they're just going through the motions. But I've always been impressed, quite frankly, even with non-professionals on selection committees, of how good a job they do on ranking professionals. We used to have, sometimes have the dean of the School of Medicine or people like that. They're not architects, but even they, if I can use that nomenclature, could tell who the top-ranked firms were. It was very, very common to have a top-ranked firm, whether it's a CM or an architect. And then, number 2 is a little harder sometimes, and it's pretty easy to pick the bottom-ranked firm. It's the 3rd and 4th that are hard sometimes to classify. But the selection process and the interview is just absolutely critical to the process. And sometimes firms get cocky. They assume they have the job, and they show up with sometimes an arrogant attitude about, I've got this project already in the bag. And another firm that's hungry comes in, and they go research the project. They talk to people, and they come in, and they just blow them out of the water. I've seen that many, many times. So I just wanted to add my 2 cents worth because they've done an excellent job of explaining the process, even though it is kind of complicated and hard to follow. But I just wanted to add my thoughts to that.
Thank you, Mr. Jim.
We would concur with Jim's statements 100%.
Well,
That's been
he
our
did make a pretty good argument for the fact that if you get left out of the interview process, you don't get a chance to blow him away. So he just made a pretty good point for that if I'm number 5 because you chose to break it at 4, and I was ready to, and I'd done my research and built a pretty good presentation, he just clearly laid out an argument for letting me in the interview, even though I'm number 5 and there was a break between, 13 and 15. So, Representative Donahue.
And to jump on what you just said on one issue, there was a group that came in toward GDOT that was going to do trimming on the interstate, and they were pretty arrogant. They were coming in, they're going to cut trees and everything, and had been pretty lax on their performance. And a father and a son came up this past year, just good old boys, that said, we can do it for this price, and got the job. And I've commented to many people, it's the best it's ever looked of trimming trees back from just a father and son working 7 days a week in so many months to say, well, we'll enjoy some free time, whatever they're going to do, going to the beach or whatever. But my main question is, we sometimes do it right by allowing the governor to have 2 picks on any board, the lieutenant governor to have 1 pick, or the speaker to have 1 pick. And a lot of times we do very bad by allowing that. We pick my best friend or whatever, and they have no clue. But most of the time, I understand that they're businessmen, they're people that are pretty much, they understand what they're trying to accomplish in a budget and a goal, and they have certain guidelines that they use and apply. Do you find that that's pretty strong in what we give you the opportunity to conduct business, that our guidelines are too strict or not strict enough? And I'm asking you that just to see.
Are you talking in general or
In
just
general.
for committee, Madam?
Committee and in general, yes, sir.
There's, for the work that we do at GSFIC, there aren't many guidelines. It's pretty broad, and the process has evolved over the years to what our professional judgment, and so we've developed policies from that. So I think that's the best answer I can give you.
Amen. I meant to mention this earlier, Mr. Jeff. If you will, pull your microphone up.
Sorry about that.
I got chastised by our sound and video technical folks, and they're recording it and then live streaming, et cetera. So
You
sorry
find
about
I'm not
that.
a public speaker.
Sarah-
I didn't really know how to step up to the mics.
Sarah did her. She told me to tell you, and I completely forgot. But anyway, and so was that it, Representative Donahue? Okay. And so I want to make sure that we stay on track with where we were. So you go.
Okay. So where we stopped in the process is we've shortlisted based on those rankings, right? So we picked 4 firms. So if you go to tab 8, you're going to see a document that was given to the 4 firms that were shortlisted, basically laying out a schedule when things are due, and if there's an on-site meeting, when that's going to be, so they can, get a good look at the project. And then we're also going to ask for a proposal at that point. And so that's what tab 9 is. That's a 40-page document. And it gives them the opportunity to really spell out the team that's going to be working on this project and what their qualifications and experience are. So we're really at this point, we're looking at the team, not so much the company. Because at this point, all the companies can do the job. We want to pick the best team.
And this is a 40-page document because it just so happens that's 40 pages they sent you in their proposal. It could be 50 or 100.
We
or
limit it at 40.
Oh, okay.
So we give them,
Why?
we give them 40 pages because the team members have a lot of work to do, and if they don't have the time to read 200 pages. If you can't tell your story at this point in 40 pages, then
We've had some that, before we limited the pages, we literally have had some that came in over 100 pages.
They can blow you away in an interview, but not necessarily in this proposal packet.
We think with what we're asking for, if you can't tell your story in 40 pages, we're just not asking for that much information. This is a response to the things that we've asked them to provide.
I just noticed he said 40-page document, and I was just that jumped out at me. Why is it only 40? And listen, you're the
we just feel like
boss.
that's the right number over our experience. We've tweaked that some, and we just feel like that's the right amount.
Because
Committee seems
I
to
noticed some of the
appreciate
pictures are bigger, some of the pictures are smaller. So if I want to do 40 pages, I can do a 1 full-page picture of my guy, digging.
You could.
Okay.
We leave that up to the firms to decide how they use those 40 pages.
Okay.
I mean, there's certain,
I found the committee members don't hold it against a firm that only submits 30 pages. They seem to prefer it.
We need to work on that down here.
Yeah. All right, so we've
So-
got the proposal.
so keep in mind, if you let all 7 or in some cases 15 firms into the interview process, that means the team members got to read, the committee members got to read 40 times whatever the amount is. So keep in mind.
Under construction management, I will agree that you have created yourself a whole lot of work.
Right, so one of the comments at the last meeting was CM at risk is an easier process. I hope I'm starting to paint a picture. It's not easier for an owner to administer CM at risk. It's the easy way out's design, bid, build. This is much harder for the owner, but we believe it's worth it for the right type project.
Yeah, I don't think we said that it was easier. What I said was you're going to hear a number of times through this process that it is simpler or easier to I don't think anybody said that it was going to be easier. So we got the proposal.
Got the proposals. Tab 10, again, is another guide for our selection members on what they need to be looking for in this second step of the process. So we're spelling out to them what the criteria is going to be for the final selection of the CM firm. So if you notice on the first page, there's 5 items that are highlighted in yellow. So the first 3 all have to do with the proposal, the written proposal. Team qualifications, performance references, quality of the management plan. That makes up 50%. The other 2 items are going to be what occurs during the interview. The methodology that the team's going to present, and this the overall impression of that team, each weighted at 25%. So we'll get the proposals ahead of time. The team members will have a chance to review those before the interview day. They'll show up on interview day, go through. We give each firm the same amount of time. And then each score will again score the proposal and the interviews just like we did. So if you go to tab 11, you're going to see a little different score sheet than what you saw before. You're going to that vertical hash line, everything to the left is you're going to rank the proposal. The 2 items to the right are a ranking during the interview process. The process of compiling the scores are exactly like they were for the shortlist process. You're going to get a total score, but then we're going to normalize that with the rankings. We add up the rankings, and the low gets it. And you'll see that with the last sheet. So in this project, some of the rankings was 6. It was pretty clear to that committee that Reeves Young was the right firm for this project.
Okay, by your pause, I'm assuming that maybe there's an opportunity to go back and on this, the guide for selection for the committee members.
Yep.
We've talked a little bit about the different committee members, and that may change from project to project based on who
It
the
will
local
change.
people
Yep.
use and et cetera. And tell us a little bit more, and obviously members, please jump in, but tell us a little bit more about relevance of team qualifications and experience, performance and references, quality of proposal management, et cetera. Because, in general, I think I understand them. But again, you're getting back into a very subjective opportunity for committee members who may or may not have in-depth education or experience or knowledge, not just of construction management and the way that works, but of a particular project. I think that's important. You know, you could build a facility that had 20 rooms, an office, and bathrooms. That's much different than relevance of team qualifications, performance and references, and quality of proposal when you're building some sort of a lab, you know, when you're building some sort of a special facility. And so it's not just subjective in these three categories, and we haven't even gotten to the wrapping your mind around methodology. I can't even start thinking about that yet, but tell us a little bit more about relevance of team qualifications, performance and references, quality of proposal, and how you see these committee members scoring that.
You want to take a stab at that first?
Basically, team qualifications, again, in this second step, it's a deeper dive into the team. At this point, in the written submittal that they submit, they'll drill deeper down on their team, their relevant experience. This is their opportunity to highlight that, hey, this team has the experience to do a project such as the one at hand. They typically are bringing their key team members to that presentation. So the committee's getting an opportunity to hear from the pre-construction manager who will be doing cost estimating during the design phase. They're getting a chance to hear from the project manager who's assigned to the project, the superintendent who's going to be on site during the construction. They really get a closer look at the team and hear a little bit more about their experience and a little bit at the methodology. It's an opportunity for them to kind of share based on what they know at that point, to kind of share with the committee, this is how we envision maybe managing this project, and it'll vary. We've had firms come in and they can show, hey, sometimes these projects are on tight sites, so they get into some of the logistics about how we'd operate around your campus, how we protect your students, how we manage deliveries. Those are the kind of things that they have an opportunity to get into. How we'll work around your schedules of events, of things on your campus. They'll hear from the superintendent, and that's usually the superintendent and the project manager who the committee really wants to hear from the most. They want to hear how that superintendent's going to run that project day to day. They want to hear how that project manager is going to make sure that project is successful. So it's an opportunity for them to hear directly from these people.
And that's all derived from the proposal. We haven't sat down in the interview yet.
Well, no, I may have jumped ahead. I'm sorry. There is that information in the proposal, but I think all of us, if you're hiring somebody, you want to interview them.
It's like a resume and an interview. If you're
Okay.
hiring somebody for
so-
your company, it's,
Okay.
What you
Yeah.
see on paper, you might ask a little bit
Absolutely.
more during the interview. Very similar.
Maybe I got lost there for a second. We are, I guess, at this point, in these three categories of relevance, performance, and references, quality of, you are in the interview right now.
Well,
It's a combination.
if you go look through the proposal, you saw a lot of pictures of people, right?
Yes, sir.
So you're getting a detailed breakdown of that person's experience and what their role is going to be on the project.
So the thought is, if you're on the committee, you would come to the interview having looked at this, having some general idea of, based on what was submitted here, how you sort of view those firms. It's an opportunity to assign some preliminary scores in those first three categories. You may get into the presentation and what really looked good on paper all of a sudden doesn't appear that well when you actually heard from the person. So you might see that score change.
Right.
I can tell you when I've been on a committee and had to vote, at this point, the company name doesn't matter to me. At this point, all the companies that we've shortlisted can do the project. I want to know who I'm going to be working with day to day and what their qualifications and experience, and do I trust them?
Mm-hmm.
So it really comes down to the team.
So, again, without just boring you, because you got to understand, y'all work with this every day. We do not. I guess we don't. Maybe Representative Pruitt does to some degree with his work, but I mean, you got to understand and appreciate that as citizen legislators, as people who are, in print shops and pest control and agriculture. I mean, I apologize, but
No need to.
the performance and references, 30% or 15% and 15%, and so we're only at about 50% of the score.
Correct.
And we have not really sat down and started looking at methodology and overall. And so we'll jump from those three to methodology and overall impression. Now, I can tell you, if I had tried to get elected with the overall impression of people from my community, they'd have said, my Lord. You know, because I don't have this college resume. I didn't go to University of Georgia and graduate with a master's, and they taken all of this into their overall impression. So tell us a little bit more about methodology. We're sitting at a table, I'm guessing, and you're out there in front of us. We start with number 4, or do we start with number 1, or do we draw out of a hat? Who decides who goes first? Walk us through the actual interview process of methodology and overall impression.
We actually do draw out of a hat.
Amen.
We'll,
I'm a fan of drawing out of the hat. Now that I might have could have won something.
To be totally transparent, it's actually an orange pumpkin.
But
Seriously.
Good.
We'll put the names of the shortlisted firms on identical slips of paper. We throw them into in this case, the pumpkin.
Are they all there at that?
No. That
Okay.
list is determined once in that first step when we come up with the short list and we send that notice to finalists. We've already determined the interview order. Before we send that notice to finalists, we'll draw those names out of the hat.
We just do that in the office randomly.
It's a random drawing.
Jeff will grab somebody walking by and just say, just pick.
And that's the order that they're interviewed, and that's communicated in that notice to finalists, so they know in advance what time their interview will be. So, but it is a random drawing.
We have 2 rooms in our office, so while one interview is going on, the team is setting up in another interview room and getting all their AV stuff.
But do
set
they
up.
all come up on the same day, roughly? So we've decided now that we're going to have in this order the rankings of 4, 1, 2, or 3. You know,
The order in which they're
the
presented.
order in which they're presented.
Correct.
And if I don't remember, and I don't guess I need to, but number 4 was Ajax Building. So let's just say number 4 is first. He comes into the interview room. And what I want you to try to do is walk us through exactly, I don't mean exactly, but as best you can, what that looks like, what it feels like, what it smells like. I mean, really,
All right.
tell us all, try to paint a picture for us that maybe we can relate to.
Presentation room, there's a table. It doesn't look a whole lot unlike what I'm seeing up here. The selection committee will be seated at the table. Actually, the firm has an opportunity. Let me really back up. The firm has an opportunity to come in prior to their presentation. There's an opportunity for them to get set up. Once they're set up, they're ready to go. We'll come in with the committee. I'll escort the committee in, or someone in my office will escort the committee in. They'll take a seat at the table, similar to what you're doing now. It's typically, there's the 5 voting members. There could be other interested parties at the table. They may not be, they wouldn't necessarily be voting members, but oftentimes, you may have a dean of a college that wants to sit through the interviews just to hear. They may not be serving as a voting member, but certainly they're welcome to participate. And myself or Jim Hyde in our office is there facilitating the process. We have a pretty rigid process. We'll go over some preliminary matters. We'll explain to the firm, you're going to have 30 minutes to make a presentation. We're going to follow that up with 20 minutes of question and answers. I'll go down the list and have the committee members introduce themselves to the firm. When they've done that, we turn it over to the firm. And it's their 30 minutes to use however they see fit. It's a lot of information to try to cover in 30 minutes. There's more similarities in their presentations than there are differences, but occasionally you see a firm maybe try a different approach, maybe just trying to mix it up a little bit. But oftentimes they'll introduce their team. Again, this is your project executive. This is going to be your project manager. This is going to be your superintendent. This is your pre-construction team. Depending on the project, you may have MEP engineers if it's complicated projects with labs and things like that, or maybe more complicated systems. So they bring the team to the table that they think is the right team to be successful on the project. More times than not, they'll talk about in the kind of the sequence. Before we can ever start construction, we have to get through the pre-construction effort, so they'll talk about that. they'll have their pre-construction team kind of talk about how they approach estimating these projects as we're going through design, what they bring to the table to help make sure these projects stay in budget as the design progresses. You don't want the design to get out ahead of the budget, and all of a sudden, you've got a $20 million design with a $15 million budget. So they'll go into detail about how they control that. They have different tools. They have different tools and things they bring to the table to provide those kind of services.
And not to interrupt you, but Representative Wertheiser.
Yeah, real quick. Is this totally open to the public so that if I'm a competitor, either winner or loser, so I can't see how my competition is doing this? Okay,
It's not open to the public.
okay.
For that reason, we don't want the fourth firm to see what the first and second firm presented, so they have an advantage going into their
Okay.
interview.
Well, I guess it goes back to the guys who are never in the room, trying to learn what will get me in the room.
Yeah.
By the way, I'd like to invite any of you to sit in on one of our selection processes, so we can talk about.
Yeah, I think that'd be beneficial. And so, but I did want to comment kind of at the point where you are now, just to remind the committee members, and I'm not trying to remind you because I think you're not listening. I just want us to be careful to try to compartmentalize to some degree all of these things that we've heard. Remember, we still are possibly not even a third of the way into the design process. That'd be fair?
That's very fair. We're
Okay.
probably not that far into
And
it.
so they're doing an interview
We may be.
with all these bells and whistles of how special they are and how they really want to do this project, not even having maybe they have like when I tell you this is my hand, you know what a hand with 4 fingers and a thumb looks like, but you don't know the fingerprints, you don't know the scars, you don't know the calluses. This is somebody sitting in an interview room telling you how they need to be your guy, the whole committee. And the only number we have is that SCL and knowledge of who the architect is. And we go, yep, like Representative Donahue said, I know what their fingerprint looks like. I better, I'm going to start tweaking and working. So I wanted the committee to remember that. We're not even looking at a blueprint yet.
You're not. What you may have, or what you often have, is, for example, it's a lab building. You may have, depending on what the labs are going to be used for, you could have labs with 15 fume hoods. They may not, at this point, they're not going to know exactly what that lab's going to look like, but they've done project with fume hoods. They've got some experience with that. This is an opportunity for them to tell the committee, hey, we've done these. What we've found using these on these kind of projects, we found by doing this or doing that or using this or using that, it's been more efficient. It's saved money. So it's an opportunity. Again, the plans aren't drawn, but we do know. Typically, we know some things. I mean, if it's a basketball court, we know it's going to probably have a hardwood floor. Didn't know you could use a bamboo hardwood until recently. When I sat through.
But there is a rendering of some sort usually of what the school or the facility or the project's going to look like.
There can be.
Maybe not. Not always.
The thought is with the CM. One of
See,
the things
that's one. And again, not even having a dog in the fight necessarily. That's one of the things that keeps coming up among people who don't have a thought either way. So let's just say there's no rendering.
Mm-hmm.
There's been no communication with the architect necessarily except the proposals and the different things. And I'm sitting there on the short list really scratching and fighting to show you how I need to be your group. And all of a sudden this guy pulls out a rendering that looks nothing like what the other one we built or whatever. I mean, and I'm just throwing that out there hypothetically, really. But I'm still just scratching my head a little bit trying to figure out, we haven't designed it. We're not even a third of the way into the design. And I'm in there fighting with 3 other companies begging you to give me a project that
Yeah, I think it's, at
that
that
I haven't
point,
seen.
It's more about what they bring to the table, what their team brings to the table, and whether you're a proponent of the CM delivery method or not. I'm not making a case one way or the other. I'm just trying to maybe help explain it a little bit.
Right.
The idea behind that CM delivery method is that it's a collaborative effort. The thought is that delivery method is most effective when you can get all the team members to the table at the same time. So you've got the owner, you've got the architect, you've got the construction manager at the table working hand in hand to try to get the most out of this project, make this project the most successful. That's why you really don't have a lot of design, or design's not very far down the road when you're trying to bring these folks on. The longer you wait, the less effective that delivery method becomes. So if that,
The team is really designing the project, not just the architect. I think that's a
But it-
key point.
It almost brings up and I think about the movie A Few Good Men. Why the two conflicting theories? We want to hurry up and get our team. We want to hurry up and move through the selection process. But yet we don't want to hurry up and try to get some concrete design and footers and brick and paint and roof. I mean, it's almost like there's two different theories to this being successful. There's the thought of selecting the architect, the construction manager, and getting the owner on board as quickly as possible. But yet nobody has a full set of plans to be able to, some of the ones that aren't making the short list, possibly never will, are going, well, see, I didn't know that. They're only looking at these projects after they're completed, and in hindsight to say, well, there wasn't as much dirt work in that as I thought they were going to do. They built it one here, one here, one here, And so it just seems like there's some conflicting theories about what is really the success of this delivery method. Hurry up and get the owner, the architect, and the construction manager on board. But yet, we'll design it after the fact. And it does make people feel warm and fuzzy to hear that everybody's working together. I don't disagree with that. Everybody's working together who was selected. The ones who did not get selected are not there to be able to work together and to help design and do so.
Our motto at GISFIC is to deliver a project, a quality project, on time and on budget. So we call that success.
Don't you think that everybody who submits their proposal, either the architect or the construction manager or the subs, how many of those would you say don't have that same philosophy? Every one of them have the same philosophy that you do. Our mission is to build a quality project within budget in a timely manner. How many of the subcontractors or construction managers or architects would you say don't have that same mission?
I don't know if I can fully answer your question, but they're in business to make money.
Absolutely. I hope so.
Sometimes they have to cut quality to make money.
Right.
Sometimes they have to go past when we really need the project because they don't have staffing or the ability to deliver the project on time.
And one of the...
We run into less of that in the CM at risk process. That I can tell you.
How would we know? Again, this goes back to the question that was raised by Representative Pruitt. If they're not able to build a portfolio and a resume of being able to do these projects, there really is no proof that they can't do every single thing they're saying they can do, except their ranking that was subjectively scored
Right.
by different committee members each time. And I know we keep going back and forth, and please again forgive me. You're just hearing from me the reason this committee exists.
No,
When this thing's over, I can promise you,
right.
the target is not to do away with anything except to figure out what's best.
I would equate it back to how do you hire an employee to work for your company?
Again, you have to be careful with that because I own the company.
Mm-hmm.
It's my company. Mm-hmm. I can hire my cousin's daughter if I want to. We're not in here trying to decide how to run my pest control company. We're in here trying to decide under the statute what is the best stewardship and quality of construction of projects that levels the playing field for everybody. I can't even compare spending $1.56 billion of hard-working men and women taxpayer dollars to my own personal investment of employing workers. I can hire anybody I choose for any reason I choose. In the legislature and in trying to set a budget for the state, we can't do that. Just can't, constitutionally. All right, Mr. Jim.
Mr. Chairman, what we've done in the past for companies trying to break into the business, if you will, whether it's an architect or a contractor, is encourage joint ventures with existing companies. Very common for a local architect firm, for example, to not have experience equal to a national firm that does laboratories or something very specialized. However, they need a local presence to run the project locally because they don't want to fly down from, they can't fly from Boston every week to go look at something. Same thing with contractors. So very common if somebody hasn't been in the business is that you encourage them to do joint ventures with other people. It may they're out of state or maybe it's an Atlanta firm that needs a local presence because they don't want to drive 5 hours down to Savannah every week either. So that's been the most successful way for minority firms especially is to joint venture with bigger firms, and they get a piece of the action and they gain that experience that way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Jim. We have a project with our school system in Coffee County doing that right now. Joint venture with Vic Suttles and an architect firm here out of Atlanta for exactly that reason. And that is and so that's a good point. And I don't mean to make it sound like that there's not a way, because some of these construction managers have worked very hard to work their way up, to have a good proposal, to have a good interview, to have the subcontractors. Listen, I'm not taking away from them at all, by any means. But that's a good point. And so we're still in the interview. I know y'all think this guy's all over the map, but I sort of remember we're fixing to jump into methodology unless they have a question. Sounds like they may have a question. Anybody got a question? Y'all good? So let's talk about methodology. And again, I'm going to need that country boy's education or definition of what you mean when you say methodology, because I can imagine that has got to be all over the map. We thousands of different termite and pest control companies, and none of us, when we pull up on a termite pre-treat, do that the same way.
Let me take a stab at that. Let's talk about a project just down the street here, the new courthouse building. The demolition of that old archives building was a challenge. So when we were interviewing the contractors, the demolition was almost as important as the construction, because that sits very close to two major interstates. And so the approach, well, and you had a large apartment complex very, close by. So the methodology and the approach that the teams presented varied. But that gave them an opportunity to say, how am I going to tackle the demolition of this project? And, some firms were going to use a lot of dynamite and some firms weren't. And so it's really up to them to decide how to demolish that building. But whatever they did, we needed to maintain the downtown connector and I-20 in a safe manner. So, and then the firm that ended up getting the job showed us exactly where they were going to put their crane, how they were going to deliver materials, because think about material delivery during the session. And so they had thought all that through. And so I guess that's the best answer I can give. So that's what they get into during the methodology part, how they going to approach that project.
And on methodology, I'm assuming that they compared the methodology of the other three candidates.
They had no idea what the other candidates were going to do.
At some point they will. The same committee's here in all four methodologies.
Oh, I thought you meant the other firms.
No.
No, the committee, you're exactly right.
So
Sorry, I misunderstood
as a
you.
committee member, I am going to compare the thoroughness of the methodology
Yep.
of the other three to that one. So the fact that I can go in there and, is this still 30 minutes? Is this still 30 minutes to discuss the first three relevance, or that's not a part of it? You get that from the proposal?
You get that from the proposal.
In that 30 minutes, we're discussing methodology and overall impression. So in my 30 minutes, I've done a much better job, or a much more thorough job, of explaining my methodology than candidates 2, 3, and, or in this case, 3, 4, and 3, 2, and 1.
Right.
So that does not necessarily mean that I was not going to do the same job as quality of job, but that firm did a much more thorough job of explaining and articulating to that committee what they were going to do, where they were going to sit the crane, where they had put the dumpsters. And my question would be the same to you. Would you not think that regardless of how they explained that in the interview, that there were pretty clear criteria on not shutting down I-20 and not shutting down I-75? And the follow-up to that would be, as a committee member, what in the world qualifies me to determine methodology of pyrotechnics and demolition? Now you, again, opening up a whole nother area of subjectivity, because I have to admit, I blew some stuff up. But that doesn't qualify me to give you a rating of 25% of methodology. So help me understand how, as a committee, I can score the methodology on that demolition fairly, just because you explained it in an elementary, thorough way to an old country boy. I'm going to give you 25%. Where in all honesty, a company that maybe didn't have the man or woman and the PowerPoint to really GPS locate every dumpster and every piece of silt fence and cloth that protected the demolition. Again, kind of getting, methodology is broad in and of itself, and add to it the complexity of subjectivity of me as a committee member giving you a score. And remember, these two very complicated, broad topics are 50% of my score. I need you to help me understand how 80% of $1.56 billion can come down to a committee of 5, and not just the subjectivity of the score, but the broad scope of what methodology even means. Because you're right, methodology of blowing something up would be a whole lot different than coming in and just tearing a few columns and piers and support walls out and loading one in the back of a truck. So help me understand, how is the committee, how are we doing the best job in as complicated and subjective as that is?
Great question. I don't know if I'm going to have a good answer for you, but from my perspective, 4 out of 5 of those committee members are folks that are very experienced in construction. You know, the member that the campus or the facility puts on, I can't control that. I don't know, they may have experience and may not, but I've got confidence that the other 4 individuals, this isn't their first rodeo. And it's kind of trust approach. I mean, yeah, I'm not a pyrotechnics expert, but I voted on that project. I just felt they were convincing that they had thought it through, and I trusted them. And you could tell they had thought it through. They'd done their homework. They weren't just making this up on the back of a napkin the night before.
Right. And you bring up one of the many reasons that I worked so hard to let's just study it, because one of the number one concerns was I'm going to get beat in a beauty contest, not on my qualifications and my experience and my price. The firms that do have more experience generally have more funding capability to have a part of their company that is purely for the methodology presentation. Fair or no? I mean, that's what they do.
I think qualifications and
companies-
experience come in as well.
Yeah,
So
that they
it's
do,
not
but
just-
it's not 50% of the score. I can show you right there on your sheet where it's not 50%. 25 from 25. We're going to methodology and overall impression. So where the highest percentage, or at least half of the score at this point in the process, is methodology and overall. And I would imagine that methodology, 25%, is at least 50% of the remaining 25% of the overall impression, if you follow me on that, which probably, I don't blame you if you don't follow me. But part of the reason we're here is because of that, is that they have the qualifications, they have the subcontractors, they have the ability, the bonding, they have everything, and they're not even making it on the short list. However, if you put them in the short list, they're not hiring a guy to come in there and blow your socks off. And Mr. Jim mentioned, they come into the interview and they just blow you away. These medium or small contractors around the rural parts of Georgia do not have that guy, that man or woman. They may come in there and sound like me, just blessed. Don't know how to articulate to you the methodology of what they're going to do, but they can assure you that under the qualifications and requirements of that job, they are not going to shut down I-20. They are not going to shut down I-75. And forgive me for kind of interjecting that, but this is the part of the meeting, this is the part of the committee process that is going to be the most important to these members. Because that's where it starts getting kind of...
I would just encourage you to put yourself in my shoes. On the morning of March 7th, or whatever date we blew that up, and part of that complex fell into I-20 or I-75, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you.
Did they have the traffic stopped momentarily?
They did.
Okay.
But if some of that roadway fell in there, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I'd be fine. I'd have to have another job.
And in the middle of...
So I want to make sure
Right.
whoever I select, I trust, and I know they can do the job.
We don't have the luxury of hypothesizing every contractor on every pod. You just said hypothetically, what if... Now, let's just say we selected a different contractor and part of it fell in I-20. We had the traffic stopped. You know what they'd have done? Man, they'd have got busy. They would have been twice as busy as they would have had it not fallen in I-20.
You'd have been asking questions.
There
about
would
how
have
to get
been
there.
there would have been consequences.
Sure.
There would have been additional cost to that contractor that would not have been paid for by the taxpayer. And so when a committee looks at statutes or the possibility of enacting law, we don't have the luxury of telling a constituent, well, what if this would have happened? Well, they don't want to hear that. And so, again, not this in no way. You're absolutely right. Put myself in your position. That's a true statement as you can say. I'm not in your position, but that's why we have the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. That's why this exists.
Agreed.
And so I hope that we're fair to you in your compensation about what you do, because it's a big job. Go ahead, Mr. Jeff.
Well, I just want to say, I'm not suggesting that our process is a perfect process, but there are projects where absolutely I believe that the CM delivery method is the right delivery method. The process that we use, there's no statute governing that CM selection process. We had to create a process. The process that was created, we basically did try to take this, the statute that governs the selection of professional services and mirror that to the best of our ability with the CM selection. So could the process be tweaked? Probably, but just to give you some idea of where the process came from, what was the thinking behind the process, to come up with a qualifications-based selection process to get a CM on board, we needed to come up with something. There was a statute governing the selection of professional services that required a qualifications-based selection process. So again, we just basically tried to mirror that process to the extent we could and apply it to the selection of construction management firms.
We've heard the beauty contest comments multiple times, and we've had, I'd say, small to medium-sized contractors in rural Georgia complain about that. So Jeff has given them this book and say, hey, we're open to changing the process. Let us know how we can tweak it and adjust it. They take the book, they come back, they scratch their head. Pretty good process. Again,
And-
we're not saying it's perfect, but what I am saying is we've been open to making adjustments, and we just haven't
And
heard
so-
anything from industry.
It
If there was a
sounds-
good reason, we would adjust.
It sounds like there are ways to possibly make it better or make some changes that's not even related to legislation. Am I right in saying that?
Most definitely.
That
Yep.
construction manual is not necessarily legislation. That is within the guidelines of what the law will allow. You can do,
The state construction manual,
yeah,
it's best practices, really.
right,
So you're
right.
right.
And so, but that's not legislative in nature. That is not law. That is a construction
The only
manual.
thing was law was we'd have one.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. I'm sorry. Mr. Pruitt.
Thank you. I just, quick question. Have we ever looked at other states and how they do it?
We have.
So you okay? Everything's good? I mean, I haven't. I just wondered if you
Just
guys
to
had.
be honest with you, they'd love to be in my shoes and have all the
Okay.
tools in the toolbox that I have, and frankly, they're jealous.
Well, then they needed to change it. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. So we covered methodology about just kind of a picture of what that means, and that was a good example, by the way, because you're right. That is something where that committee needs to be reasonably confident. And I think part of doing a good job in your interview explaining your methodology is a good way to convey. It's not that person's fault that the other folks didn't do a good job explaining their methodology.
Right. I can think of a project we had recently where the campus had a problem with erosion control on their previous project. And the superintendent happened to come in and talk to us about how he was going to contain the erosion on this project. And so that resonated with the campus because they dealt with that was just, I'd say, luck. I mean, this person didn't know they had a problem previously. So, but addressing that issue was important for that one committee member. Maybe that didn't resonate as
Right.
much. So, that's how methodology the scores can maybe vary.
Right.
Because what's important to one person may not be as important to another.
And it's not always just methodology of construction. It could be their cost estimating, their subcontractor management plans, any number of things.
How the superintendent approaches the job every day. This is how I am going to manage this job.
It could be safety, just basically how you going to run this project on behalf of the state.
And in this one, looking at the scores for Reeves, obviously they were far and
It looks like in this case,
Yeah.
the committee felt like after the interview, they were the right firm for the job.
oh yeah, I mean, and I don't know if the number is actually the reflection, but they were far and above the number one, so that makes it a little easier. And so my concern, or the people's concern, possibly this committee's concern about subjectivity in a situation like this is, not as much a problem, but I still say when you have one scorer that is a 6 and one that's a 2, that's huge, because if there's only 5 members,
Yeah.
and 25, 30% of those members are scoring them that different,
Yeah.
then you possibly do have that person with thousands of dollars and hours of time invested.
I'm not going to disagree with you in this comment, but I'm just going to flip the coin over on the other side. We are blessed in Georgia to have many great contractors. There's a fine line between 2 and 6 in many cases, a really fine line. And so we're in a good position to have a lot of great, we have never scrambled and said, man, we're not comfortable with this short list. It's, man, we feel bad we left that firm out. So,
And then obviously we all know, and I'm going to try to move to wrapping this up and give just a minute for Department of Education because schools are so much different. But we've already covered 99%. I just wanted them to explain a little bit more about how different the schools are once we start a project. But on overall impression, you know, again, I think it would benefit this committee and benefit this process by looking at the percentages of weight that all of this carries, because we still, and I can't even believe I'm saying this, we still have not talked about price. We still have not even, I guess quoting you, we hadn't even scratched the surface in design. And that's hard to explain from the well of that House chamber. Would the committee members agree with that? That's hard to explain to constituents, that we've already selected an architect and a construction manager, and he's pretty much already looked at the numbers of all his subs, I'm assuming, he or she, and we're fixing to get rolling on a project and have not even discussed the design to completion or the price in that.
What you run into more times than not, especially technical college system, Board of Regents, a lot of our projects, an agency has made a request, hey, we need we're doing some projects for the GBI. They needed a lab down in Pooler, I believe is where that one is. I don't know the number. It's a hefty number, $30 million, but they made a case to get funding for their project. They've been given $30 million to get everything they need, and basically that's going to be their project budget. Now it doesn't within that number, the fees aren't the design fees aren't identified, the construction management fees aren't identified going in, but they know they've got $30 million to get everything that they need to get. Out of that $30 million, those design fees will come out of there. The cost to bring on the construction manager will come out of there. And so I guess I don't know if I'm shedding any light or anything, but it's not an open checkbook. There's a project budget that's already been established going in, and everything's got to come out of it. Now, we make that selection of the design firm. That's negotiated. That's coming out of the project budget. Then the same thing with the construction manager. And those construction manager, that delivery method is basically just a cost plus. It's based on the construction manager's actual cost plus a fee. And that comes out of that $30 million. And that team working together has to deliver a project within that. And I'm just using $30 million in this case, whatever the budget happens to be. They've got to deliver a project within that budget. So I don't know if that.
So it does, and I think that's obviously beneficial to the committee. And I'm gonna close with these few questions, and we're gonna move on. And I'll try to do a better job setting the next meeting. But if the owner, the architect, and the construction manager working together is a good process, in which I believe it is, I'm not saying that it's not. Why are there still a significant, I'd say maybe not significant, but a fair number of change orders? They control everything. They hadn't even started the design yet, and you've already got everybody at the table. How do you still have change orders? And if there are change orders, which there are, does the construction manager, the subcontractors, and the architect still make their percentage of that? So the questions were this: if everybody working together is the best process because everybody's on board, there still seems to be a fair number of change orders, and when there are change orders, the architect still makes a part of that. How is it that the architect, in many cases, still can profit, and which I'm not against profit, I'm all about people making the money, but there still seems to be some confusion with the change orders, and then the architect gets a percentage, the construction manager, and the subs are turning in numbers that aren't competitively bid. If I'm the electrician on that job and the architect and the owner and the construction manager decide, hey, we want 25 more lights down this line coming into the school. They give it to me, and I go, hey, I appreciate that.
Well-
You know, I'm gonna give you a number that's gonna be as fair as possible without you raising red flags. Then everybody up the food chain from me gets a piece of that.
And Marvin,
But
before,
that's a owner requested change though, correct? The bulk, I'm trying to put a percentage on it. I'm gonna say 60% of our change orders are usually owner-related requests. Somebody at the campus, as the building is getting developed, sees something that they want to change that they just couldn't envision or didn't anticipate at the time that the plans were developed. I mean, I would say on average, we have about 1.5% to 2% of our projects. The amount of change orders is probably 1.5%, 2%. And I'd say 60% of that amount is owner-requested change. If it was a design error or something we feel like the architect should have caught that didn't, they don't get extra. We're telling them to correct it.
But if
It's on them.
If just to say the number's 2%, because I can't do
Yeah,
halves.
let's do that. That's probably a good number.
1.56 billion.
Mhm.
What's 2% of that?
What, 30 million, something like that?
The last two elementary schools built in my community were 4.3 or 5 and 5.2. You could build 5, 6 elementary schools in my community for the change order alone. And again, I'm bad about getting into the weeds. I'm going to close. We appreciate your hard work, and I hope to God you don't think that this is somehow targeted at you
Nope.
or construction managers or architects. But when I started trying to wrap my mind around my number one obligation of keeping this budget low, keeping this budget balanced, and being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, this was a pretty decent place to start. Would you agree with that? I mean, because this is a lot of money. We're not criticizing anybody, the GISFIC management and department, the construction managers, the architects. So thank you so much for, do y'all have any other questions before we let them get up? I'm going to let our friend from the Department of Education come, and here's what I want him to share with us. Just the difference in how this flows down to the local school system. Thank y'all so much. And I promise we're going to be out of here at 1, so this has got to be quick.
Wait a minute, you didn't really have 15 minutes when you said it was 1 minute?
Well, they're doing $10 million projects with only a 30-minute presentation, so this is going to be simple. And so,
I wish I believed that, Mr. Chairman. I will tell you this, not to muddy the water, but school construction, the construction business period, I think you pointed out several times, this is a very complicated issue. And it's not so much that it's pretty simple math, a lot of big numbers, a lot of zeros, but the math's still math. It's adding,
That's right.
subtracting, multiplying, dividing. But it's a lot of balls in the air all at one time. And I've tried to listen to the kind of where you started and see if I could pick up there with local school systems and talk a little bit about how that's different. I hadn't planned to talk about the selection process for the architect, but since you brought it up, let's start there. School systems are not statutorily bound to have a process for selecting an architect. If you were to ask, my question, if I were you, would be, well, how is that true? Why does the state have to follow a process prescribed in law, but the local boards of education don't? And I feel like the guy who was on TV and says, look, I'm not a lawyer, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express one night. I'm not a lawyer, but my lawyer friends tell me the reason for that is because in the statute clearly excludes the Board of Regents, for example, from having to follow the statutory requirement for the selection of a design professional. But local boards of education are left out. So the statute is silent, and when the statute is silent, you can't assume it meant to cover somebody. So local boards of education are at their own device when it comes to choosing the architect. It happens in a lot of ways. Some school districts will conduct a process almost identical to what you heard GSFIC describe, where they put out a request for proposal that asks for a qualifications-based proposal for those services, and they'll go through a vetting process to get down to a number that they'll invite to an interview. Price may or may not be part of the consideration. It can be.
That's up to the school board.
That's up to the school board. They can say, listen, in part of your presentation, we want to know about your qualifications. And we know how this works. It is a percentage of the stated cost limitation of the project. We're going to tell you what the SCL is because that's our budget. We want you to design to that budget. In fact, if there are any state funds in this project, the department requires what's called a mandatory addendum to the architect's contract, which has the stated cost limitation in it. And it can't be changed once it's signed unless the local board approves that change. And what would cause that to change would be, as GSFIC pointed out, any owner-driven changes to the project. So that being said, I may be selecting an architect based on qualifications, but over here there may be a column that says, are you 6% of the cost, the SCL? Are you 5%? Are you 4%? What is your percentage? It doesn't mean I'm going to select you based on that, but I'm going to use that as one of the criteria. And so that leads us to, I might not select the cheapest guy because the cheapest guy may not have the best qualifications. So
And they're not bound to select the cheapest guy.
That's right. That's correct. Not in a qualifications-based proposal. I want to focus on, so that gets us to the architect. I'll try to focus on the question of determining which construction delivery method to choose and then detailing a walkthrough of how that works. Generally speaking, the factors that I've found over the years that school systems take into account when it comes to choosing construction delivery method are the size of a particular project. We've heard some discussion about that. The unique nature of a site. In a metro area, you have some pretty serious obstacles that you don't have in Douglas or Coffee County. You might take into account the time constraints for the project. Design, bid, build takes a little bit longer because we've got to design the thing and get specifications and bid documents that we can put on the street, and we can get a number. You've learned under CM at Risk, I can do all of that simultaneously with the design, so I can actually get started with site prep, other kinds of issues before the architect has a final approval on his design documents. Pre-construction services are a big consideration with school systems. Larger school systems may have staff architects or staff attorneys or staff engineers that can do some of that pre-construction work, whereas a small school system like yours may not have that kind of expertise, and that's one of the things that CM will bring to the project is this pre-construction service activity. And then, of course, the past experience that the district's had with one method or another. That always comes into play. Just to give you two quick anecdotes related to that, I think it would have been very beneficial to have a large school system sit here and a small school system and talk you through how they do this. In the absence of that, I made a couple of phone calls yesterday, so I'll just do it for them. If I misrepresent their position, just know that's my own fallibility. But the large school district says, look, we do some projects DBB and some CM at Risk. And typically what we're looking at is the complexity of the site and the compression of the schedule. If I don't have a complex site and I got plenty of time, I like design, bid, build. I think I get a really good number on bid day mostly. And to the point GSFIC made, we have really good contractors in the state, and you can feel pretty confident you're going to get a good contractor from that process. I do want to put this footnote in there because local school systems have had some of the same experiences, and so that these guys described. And so if I'm a local district And I did a design bid build project, and it was small, and I had all kinds of trouble. You know, the contractor seemed like a good guy. We thought he could do the work. He had had the bid bonds, had all that stuff. But we just couldn't, it had trouble from the beginning. He was late. We had some change orders that we shouldn't have had, and maybe that wasn't managed well. We just had a bad experience. That is a lot of times going to drive that next decision about should we stay with design bid build or look at some other options. What I do see school systems moving to a little bit is if they have great confidence in design bid build, but they're worried about low bid on bid day, you can do a qualifications-based proposal for design bid where price is a component, but it's not the component. So you don't have to scrap design bid build just because you had that bad experience. So the large school system looks at site complication perhaps and compression of schedule. The smaller school system, what I got from them was very similar to what I described. They were hard bid folks. They did a couple of projects, didn't go well, had some bad experiences, had a little bit more complicated project where they were going to do a full renovation of a facility and maybe a few additions, decided to try CM at risk, and had a really good experience. And what I was told from them consistently was that experience was good. And let me just, to my own way of thinking, here's what that means. On time, under budget. I mean, there's a lot of things that go on a project that can make it good or bad on any given day. But at the end of the day, if you can stand up in front of the local board and say, we're on time and we're on or under budget, that's pretty solid. So they had that experience on the first one, tried it on the second one, had the same experience, and now wouldn't consider doing anything different. And part of the reason was the on time, under budget with few change orders. But the real key in their position was the pre-design services. And let's go back to the architect for a minute, because now I want to talk about how it really works. So if I'm a school system and I'm not bound to go through a selection process for an architect, and Joe, the architect, has built every school in this school system for the past 15 years, and we like him. We got a good relationship. He knows we don't want a lot of fluff. We need a front door, back door, classroom doors, hot and cold run. He knows what we need. We like him. Sometimes he pulls the one off the shelf from last year or last time, but occasionally we go to him and say, no, we want, this is out in a local community. This is in Broxton. We want it to be a little bit different. He can do that too. So we've already hired our architect. And if we're going to do design, bid, build, it's pretty straightforward. Design the documents, bid the project. During the design phase of the project, local school systems are required to submit their plans to DOE for approval in 3 phases. There's the preliminary set. You got a preliminary set of drawings. You submit them to us. We review them based on our criteria. We make comments. We send you the comments back. You address the comments, and then you send us what we call a check set. We check to be sure you did what we said you need to do. Once that check set is approved, then we can issue a final approval. In design bid, our final approval document says you cannot open bids prior to this date. We put that in the approval letter based on the 28-day requirement that's in law. On the so that's pretty straightforward process. With the CM at risk, the district may have the architect on board and then hire the CM. The architect's always going to do what we call programming first. He's going to meet with the high school staff. He's going to meet with the superintendent, assistant superintendent. Maybe they throw a board member or two. Maybe it's the full board. And they're going to talk about what are the spaces we want to build. And once they've listed those spaces, we call that the program. And once the architect has the program, he goes back to the office. He starts to put that on a piece of paper. And what almost always happens is when he starts to design the program, comes up with that first schematic, he's designed a 300,000 square foot facility. But the system can really only afford 175,000 square feet. So somebody has to go down and fix all that. Where I think the local district sees these pre-design services for construction managers at risk being helpful That's when the CMR comes in and says, okay, we're going to assist you in bringing that 300,000 square foot facility down to 175,000 square feet. And while we're doing that, we're going to use our experience to also deal with some constructability issues. And I don't mean to throw my architect friends under the bus, but why not? Well, so here, look, my experience with architects is this. It's not their fault. It's just how it works. They design. If you think about designing in degrees, there's a day when you've designed enough, and then there's a day when you got a lot more design than you need. So that architect's always trying to find that balance. When do I quit? When do I put the pen down? Well, sometimes he stops at I specified copper tubing in all the plumbing throughout the building. When if he'd have gone one more step and dug a little deeper, he could find out the code actually allows you to use PVC. The CM comes in on the backside of that and says, hang on a minute. I noticed you specified copper. If we could specify PVC, that's $100,000 savings on this project. Or pick a number. Doesn't matter what it is, $5,000. That adds up after a while. So a few of those experiences and what I think most school systems who stick with CM at risk walk away feeling is that when they get the GMP for that project, the CM has gone through and value engineered most everything that he can out of the project, has really held the architect to the district's programming criteria, and at the end of the day, that GMP should be something pretty close or under what was the original stated cost limitation for the project, which was the budget you gave them all to start with. And if you can get to that and end up with a good quality facility at the end of the day, that's a victory for the local district. So there are all kinds of nuts and bolts inside that vehicle. And I'm happy to answer questions about any of them, but that's a pretty high level view of how it works. And I'll be honest with you, it is complicated at some but it's pretty simple too in that regard. The way I've described it, I think, it is pretty true to how it works. And at least, and I told you this last time. Look, I'm a school person. That's my experience. I was the guy on the ground who was the face of a new school at a school district. And, you know, I mean, I built a doghouse once, but, you know, I didn't plumb it or heat it or cool it. So, I mean, you know, I get where you're coming from about who has what level of experience. But I think that's what I'm seeing with school systems is that's another reason to turn to someone who has that kind of experience, because we're a small district. Maybe I've got a facilities director. Maybe I don't. Maybe it's just the superintendent, you know, bless his or her heart. And so to have somebody that has that kind of experience that represents the school district, I mean, their job, they hold the contracts. They hold the risk on the job. But their job is to work for the school system. Then I think that's another compelling reason we sometimes see it.
Well, thank you so much. And one of the things you started off saying was about how the statute maybe allows the school system to do something that the state does not have to do, or whatever, not having to do an RFP or an RFQ right. for design services. And I'm not sure, Representative Pruitt may remember Henson Mosley.
I remember Henson Mosley.
Oh, Henson Mosley. I don't know if some of you remember him, but he got on this tear about wanting to do every school the same. You remember that?
I do.
I'm not there, you know, so I'm not saying that, but some of the points you made, or actually JISFIC actually made too, about some of the change orders are owner-driven. You know, an owner, again, this is just me talking out loud, thinking out loud. An owner, and maybe this is not the right way to say it, but shouldn't have the ability with taxpayer dollars to just decide arbitrarily, just because the board says, well, that'll be pretty, or that'll be neat, to drop a $300,000 change order.
Yeah.
And I know that conversation probably came from what we like to call in Atlanta as local control. But we don't allow University of Georgia or whomever, we don't allow technical college system to do that. Am I right? Just the owner to just arbitrarily decide, hey, I want to do this, or maybe they can. I'm not sure, and so that's where a lot of this conversation came from as well, where these subs and contractors, construction managers are working with owners to say, hey, we're well under budget, and here's something you might want.
Well, I do want to address, I had this thought as I was listening to the conversation about change order, because I think it's important to remember. And I don't intend to try to convince you that I'm the voice of authority when it comes to the definition of these things, but here's what I think I know. What I think I know is in design, bid, build, when those documents are bid, anything after that that's not somewhere in an allowance budget or a contingency budget, and it impacts the contractor's ability to complete the project, that's a change order. I always like to use this example. I was renovating a school one summer, and we did not plan for sanitary sewer tear out and rebuild in a bathroom. But once they got into the bathroom, you couldn't complete it without it. There was no provision in the budget for that. That was the change order. The contractor couldn't complete the work he had been asked to do without fixing the sanitary sewer. But at the same time, I had a roof that was starting to leak. I'm standing outside one day scratching my head saying, man, I'm talking to him. He's standing beside me. I guess we're going to have to put a new roof on the building. And he says, well, my company does that. Why don't you just hire me? I'm already here. You just tell me what you want. We start next week. That's not a change order. That's a new bid opportunity. And for me to turn to him and say, sure, do my new roof is against the law. So in design, bid, build, to my way of thinking, it's not that you create the need for this place for change orders to occur, but it's much more likely to occur in that environment. When I start working with the CM at risk, here's what's different. It's not a change order until I've issued bid documents that somebody has to respond to. So when we're going through those documents and as the CM at risk, I point out to the design professional, I think we can get by with PVC pipe instead of copper. And I'm using this example because this has happened on a project that we were doing at one of the state FFA camp, for example. If that gets changed in design, that's not a change order. Doesn't cost me a dime, not one dime. And what we tell school systems is, if you think about the construction process as a linear function, and there's a day at which back here, whenever you play with the pencil, it doesn't cost you anything. But there's a day when you pull that backhoe out there and you dig a footing and you pour concrete in it, everything after that's going to cost if you made a mistake. So we preach on the planning side, fix your problems there, because once you get into construction, those are change orders and they are expensive. So one of the things that the small school system said to me was, the reason we didn't have any change orders was because we got all that stuff figured out in those pre-designed services. And he said to me, I cannot emphasize for this school system, this particular school system, the importance of those pre-designed services.
And under that scenario, a change order under design, bid, build, someone would sort of have to come to the table for accountability on
right.
covering that, and there would be some shared.
That's right.
Whereas under CM, they all kind of agree, hey, we didn't do. That does not necessarily mean that construction management is cheaper than design, bid, build.
No, I don't. I hope I didn't mean to.
No.
I didn't
I'm just
imply that.
bringing that kind of out.
That's right.
That's just a different way of going
That's
about
right.
it. You're right. In
That's right.
construction management at risk, you didn't have to drop an RFP for a bid for the roof. Whereas under After you'd already started
Well-
working under design bid build, you'd have had to have
Well,
done a
and-
full change order.
But I want to point this out too, because I think this is important. And this is, all right, this is my personal bias, and I'm just telling you that, so you'll know it. I think if I'm a local school system with limited resources, what I'd really like to have is a convenience contract with a construction manager at risk. I'd like to go through a selection process this year, hire a firm, and for the next 5 years, I'd like to throw them everything that comes my way. I mean, look, here are 2 projects I know I want to do. I want you to propose for that. But that roof that I couldn't predict, when it comes up, I want to just be able to hand that to you. It's our opinion at the State Department of Education that you can't do that because, number one, it violates the law. But even if it didn't violate the law, there's a state board rule that says that you can't do anything that limits competition on school construction projects. So if I'm standing out there in that same scenario I discussed earlier, and I don't have my design bid build contractor, I've got my CM at risk. This is a true story, by the way. And you're building this new school for me, or you're doing that renovation project, and this roof thing comes up, I still can't turn to you. That's a new contract opportunity. I can do CM at risk for the roof, but I got to go out there and look for another CM at risk. I got to give everybody the opportunity to propose on that project. Now, what I always try to tell people is, look, if you got one on the job already and he's already mobilized, he can't give you the best proposal. You know, that'll tell you something. You really ought to go find somebody else. But at the end of the day, you can't use the CM at risk. You shouldn't. Let me say, I ain't going to tell you what's happening and what's not happening. You shouldn't use the CM at risk model as or delivery method as a catch-all for new contract opportunities that clearly ought to be made available to other bidders or proposers, if that makes any sense.
But doesn't a convenience contract do the same thing?
I'm
It
saying,
takes away competition from
Yeah.
everybody who wants to bid on a job-by-job basis.
and what I'm saying is, the State Department of Education's opinion, I think I can't say that, it's not just mine,
Right.
is that that type of convenience contract with a CM at risk is illegal. Here's what happens, Representative. I get a CM contract where I say, look, I'm building a new school and I need a new roof on that one. I want you to manage those 2 projects. And then there's a little clause at the bottom that says, and anything else that happens or anything else I can think of that I hadn't thought of already. That's not the legal term, but that's the Mike Rowland term, the way it goes. Well, we think those any other activity clauses they're not legal. You can't do that. If you have a state-funded project and we find out that you awarded the project based on that clause in your contract, you get $0 reimbursed to you. Now, if you're spending your own money, I don't have a stick to hit you with. But down the road, if Joe's Roofing comes along and says, well, I'd like to sue you because I'd like to have an opportunity to propose on that or bid, whatever you decide, whatever method you said you wanted to use, but you didn't give it to me. You just gave it to the guy that was already on the job. I don't want to defend that in court.
When you say your own money,
Well, good point. The district money versus state money.
it's all taxpayer
Yeah,
money. Then.
absolutely.
Okay.
Poor choice
Look here,
of words
Mike.
on my fault.
Buddy, I appreciate you. Thank you to the committee members and the visitors. Today, again, was just about trying to bring us up as best you possibly can on all the different things about this. Do the committee members have any other questions? Thank y'all so much for coming, and we are going to be adjourned.